You want to say that with mics off?
Okay. Call the meeting to order, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Our first item this afternoon is a delegation. I'd like to invite Mr. John Bartol to come forward. He's here to speak about the redesignation of 561 Shaw Avenue.
Welcome, Mr. Bartol.
Thanks.
Just pull the mic maybe a little closer.
I'll let my wife's going to do the speaking.
Okay. So just bring the mic a little bit closer. There we go.
And the pointer is that.
Okay. Whenever you're ready.
You just have to move it around. You have to hit it. You just have to.
Oh, I just hit it once?
Can you give it just turn it off?
Yep. Do you have a mouse? Maybe I can just...
There it is. Right here.
there it is. Okay.
Can you just move it like a mouse?
Okay, great, thanks. Okay, thank you for having us here, Mr. Mayor, councillors. Our property for discussion today is 561 Shaw Avenue. We've included 565 there, and you'll understand why afterwards. But it's in sub-area G, Central Lougheed. This is the BLNP excerpt for our area. And this hasn't changed. This is actually what was adopted this past June. You can see here the red circle is actually delineates where we are at 561, 565 Shaw Avenue. And that red circle is actually within the yellow delineation of what we believed was tagged as medium density. So all along we've been thinking that this was all medium density for us, until about a week before the public hearing, when somebody at our Strata Council general meeting said, look at the fine print. So we ended up coming to the public hearing on June 26th, and we had two delegations coming from 561. One of them was John. And in that public hearing, we actually had the question asked by the two delegations and also by you, Mr. Mayor, about the demarcation of, the demarcation of this area here, and whether, or maybe the lack of demarcation. And Mr. Merrill, and I think I heard him here somewhere, Mr. Merrill, put simply, advised that that area was not considered for land use designation change. So this is actually in response to the public hearing. So we're requesting council to grant due process for the fair review of 561 and potentially obviously 565 Shaw Avenue's land use designation, and to include consideration of these items that I'm just going to talk about really briefly. The first item is to restore the original. It actually had original designation of medium density. In 1967, 1969, the community plan actually designated this whole area up on the right-hand side here in the red circle as medium density. And 561 Shaw Avenue is in there as well. In 1969, the Provincial Department of Highways expropriated land from, and let me just try and do this, 562 and in part 568, and for a road realignment project. And it was to go through 561 Shaw Avenue down to Lougheed Highway. And in response to that, the 1973 community plan was actually amended the boundary of the medium density from the Clayton side all the way to west of 562 Rochester and 561 Shaw, and redesignated all of this area here, 562, 568, all the way down to Lougheed Highway, as single-family residential. So what happened afterwards was I guess shortly after, the road realignment project was abandoned, and the appeals in the early 1980s to restore the apartment designation to the pre-1973 boundary, council actually compromised to return it, but not to medium density, but rather to low density because of opposition in the neighborhood. And so 561 was actually developed first, then as low density, 565 followed because they couldn't apply for a medium density. And then 562, 568 actually did a land assembly and they applied for a medium density and was granted the medium density. But that was okay because that's what was the original plan back in 1967, 1969. So the 2017 BLNP unknowingly reverted the property south of 561, 565 Avenue, down here, to restore it back to the medium density, but it really left 561 and 565 Shaw Avenue literally in the past. We're still at low density. And just to give you an idea here, in 1966, the Coquitlam's population was about 4,100,000, and it was medium. We were at medium density at the time. And 50 years later, the population has actually more than tripled, but we're still at the low density to which we were actually, put to, even though that project was abandoned, right? So the next thing is what we looked at, and I don't know if it makes a difference, is there are similarities to another neighborhood, which is on Medore. Medore has a cul-de-sac, we have a cul-de-sac. They actually are transitioning from medium density right to townhousing, almost back to back. Shaw-Clayton corridor actually has a softer transition with a street, with Clayton and Shaw as a soft transition. So, we kind of wondered, okay, is that maybe why we're not being put in as, medium density? Don't know. So here we kind of tried to imagine what the medium density would look like. 561 and 565 Shaw Avenue are in the middle here. We've got the north of the property is medium density, south of the property is medium density, west of the property is medium density. So I wouldn't really consider that a canyon. I kind of consider that as a coliseum. We're kind of right there in the arena where the lions are, right? But nonetheless, that's what we kind of imagined it to be. So the last slide here kind of depicts, you've got low density here in the bottom part of the low density for 561 and 565 Shaw Avenue, and we're amongst all the medium density land use designations. And it really does put us at a disadvantage when the properties are, when the developers are taking a look at which lands to assemble. And it's actually a reality because Strata Council has now been approached by real estate agents and developers asking about how come you guys are low density? And we're going, we don't know, right? So lastly, we're here to deliver a petition by our owners at 561 Shaw Avenue, and all of them are 100% in favor of having a land use designation change from low density to medium density.
You can just hand that to the clerk. Thank you.
Thank you. And I think that's it.
Pretty much.
Okay.
I'm glad I spoke so well. There was one point I wanted to just check on. In the scope and process, in the council meeting immediately following the BLMP, when you were discussing whether to go forward, accept the BLMP and what could be done with these, the points were made that we could have this wrapped into the housing choices review. The last councillor who spoke, I forget the name, specifically asked Mr. McIntyre how it would work, and would it be addressing the Oakdale area and the Gilby-Clayton area and the others that were discussed. And Mr. McIntyre said that would come forward in the scope and process report. I looked at the scope and process report that was presented on the 17th, and it said it would only address those who had presented petitions as of the public hearing date. So we were a delegation, but we didn't have a petition at that time. Will we still be considered within that program?
Okay, well, I'll throw Mr. McIntyre.
Yes, thank you, and good afternoon. I can't remember the exact wording of what the the fine print said, but and I'll ask Andrew Merrill, our community planning manager, is more familiar with the property and the process, to speak to it as well. But there were a number of areas that had come forward, and certainly there was your neighbors at that session, and we took note of that as well. It's something that we're looking at as part of the business plan process as well. So there's my sense, Mr. Chair, would be at the committee's direction and affirmation. There's a number of areas have come forward and say, me too. So we'll try to find a way to address that. But Andrew, is there anything specific? Because I'm a little bit confused about this sense of a low-density designation and whether that's the zoning that's being confused with the official community plan land use designation.
Thank you, through the chair. So the property has an existing low-density apartment designation, which was the designation that corresponds to the RM1 zone that both this property and 565 Shaw are both zoned, and that accommodates the former development that's there today. Both the low-density apartment and the medium-density apartment, they share, in terms of our land use map, the same underlying color of that dark brown. The difference being the medium-density also has a cross or a single hatch on it. So I can certainly appreciate, depending on the quality of maps, it may not always be easy to visually determine or discern the difference between the two. But certainly we looked at these two parcels through the Coquitlam Lougheed process, and recognizing that 561, which was built around 1985, and then 565, which was built around 2005, kind of staff's determination was there wasn't a lot of redevelopment potential. We assumed that they were too new, and we just left them alone with their existing designation that predated the plan update. And actually, I would say the same for some of the medium-density apartments to the north and west. While they're built out under an RM2 zone, it may not be economically feasible for an applicant to come in and rezone to RM3, still under a medium-density designation, just to add a couple of extra floors to the building. Normally, there needs to be a much larger jump to trigger redevelopment.
Okay, thank you. I had a question from Mayor Stewart.
Thank you. And I thank you for coming in. I appreciate that you don't appreciate how unique your property is, one of the only that has been reduced in density over decades of designations.
Only plots in the entire BLNP.
Yeah.
At this designation.
Yeah, understood. And so I've got a question for staff in a minute. Your opening slide, though, and you spoke much better today than you did in the public.
I thought so.
Your opening slide was referred to due process.
Yep.
In what way are you suggesting that there wasn't due process, or is that just a
Well, the suggestion was what we heard during the public hearing was that land area, the area around that 561 Shaw Avenue wasn't considered because of, I didn't hear as much as what you said right now, but what we assumed was that it was never considered. So we're saying, please consider it now.
Okay, that's better than lack of due process, because we went through the same process as other parcels, but I recognize that you disagree with the decision of staff. I
didn't know there was a decision, actually, because it was the other.
And I wasn't aware either, but I would urge us to perhaps ignore the age of the building and go with land use, the potential land use, because there are some times where a building could suffer damage, say from a fire, or could suffer damage from water ingress that makes it unpalatable to try to repair it, or at least a higher designation, if that's appropriate in the base land use designations, would assist making a decision as to whether to repair or go for replacement. So, and I am not suggesting we do anything at this point. I'm comfortable with the process as laid out, but for future processes, perhaps we need to make sure that every parcel of land is the appropriate designation in the OCP, not related to the age of the building that's there, but rather reflecting good planning.
Okay. Councillor Wilson.
and maybe this is to Andrew, on Mayor Stewart's point, looking at the age of the building, was maybe subconsciously staff trying to save the building? Or, because I agree with what Mayor Stewart was saying, is the land use is probably more important than the age of the building.
Through the chair to Councillor Wilson, it's not a matter of saving the building, it's looking at a determination of, one, what is the right land use given its location within the neighborhood, and as much as it's a low-density apartment designation, it still falls under an apartment designation with an RM zoning, and that type of multifamily development seemed to be appropriate in this location given the context and other development around it. The determination was made just to leave these parcels alone, basically.
If it had been built in 1965 rather than 1985, would that have made a difference?
It might have. I guess it would also depend on other uses around it.
Bear in mind also the apartment buildings to our left, they're only 13 years more older than our townhouses. Right? They're 1972, and they will be redeveloping. That's a guarantee. They stated that they want to do that. And 85, that's 32 years old now. That's getting on for a townhouse.
Yep.
It is. Trust me.
Okay.
I'm 58 today, so.
What was it? Richard?
He rests his case.
Okay, Chris. Good point. Okay. Councillor O'Neill.
And just to be clear, in terms of land use and zoning, regardless of how recent the update of the neighborhood plan was, and it's quite recent in this case, council in the city is always open to anybody coming and asking for an OCP redesignation and a zoning change. That we're open to considering those all the time. And in considering, I know when council considers OCP changes and zoning changes, they look at the surrounding neighborhood and how would this new zone fit in, how would this new designation fit in. So those are even though this is a brand new plan, we have a process in place that's pretty fair and open to receiving suggestions and applications for changes. You understand that?
Yep.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Well, within the plan and when it was passed, there is an amending formula within the Coquitlam Lougheed plan to submit applications through the planning for an amending for that area. So just not the neighborhood attached review that you could do. You could also talk through planning about the amending formula within the plan and going through that application to make an amend through the amending formula to your properties here also. So you have really two options. That one report on if it's allowed within it, but you also have the amending formula, which, if Mr. Merrill, do you want to give any information on the amending formula? No, that's fine.
See if I can remember it off the top of my head. Well, no, certainly, any property owner has the right to come forward to propose an OCP amendment for their property in conjunction with a development proposal. And through the Coquitlam Lougheed process, a number of assessment criteria were developed to help both staff and council determine the value of those proposed OCP amendments when considering them.
So that's another option for you.
Okay. I understood that actually that we probably, would we be able to do it under the amending formula? Or, and I mean, that was the thing, was the housing choices was, I think, more, it was leaning more towards the housing choices.
I think I would recommend is to go to planning, talk to them in their departments, go see them at the counter, talk to them, or see with Mr. Mack or Mr. Merrill, see somebody and discuss your options and what they think would work best. It's not the best here to discuss those options.
Absolutely.
Probably through planning would be your best way to discuss that and get some more information on that. And then from that information, you can then determine if you have somebody who wants a building or whatever, you can discuss it with them and then let them make that determination which direction that they feel would be best for everybody involved.
But we can be assured that this will be, the petition will go forth as part of what was being considered.
Well, yeah.
Okay.
Mr. Gilbert, just a second.
I can't be assured that it goes part of, I don't know what the process it would be attached to at this stage, but you can be assured that by presenting here, it's been presented to all of council and staff will have access to it. Absolutely.
Okay.
Sorry. There was reference made, though, to a process that would apply to all parcels for which we had received a petition. Is this included in that process? Now that we've received a petition.
A deadline.
to the chair, Your Worship. Again, I can't remember the precise wording. It may have been something along those lines, but I think, clearly, and these residents here have been preceded by another resident in that very same block that came forward. So it was on the radar. There's been other groups. 2 weeks ago, there was a group from South Oakdale. Prior to that, there was another group that presented at the public hearing. So I don't think we're going to get hung up on technical fine print wording in terms of if it was in before or after. I think that the fact, one of the triggers that Andrew's laid out was the submission of a petition to council. We've now got that in hand. And I think so. There's a couple of these areas around the Coquitlam Lougheed broader area where people have come forward. And so we're looking at that, and certainly we'd be pleased to meet and speak with you. And we've got some ideas that we'd be submitting to council probably as part of the business plan process for next year to deal with that.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. McIntyre. Thank you very much.
So May is waiting outside.
Yeah.
May is outside.
Mayor Stewart, still.
Sorry. So I don't speak for council on this item, but I will suggest that from my perspective, this one's an easier one and more logical perhaps than some of the other work that has to be done there. So, and I sense from council that we have a measure of confidence that staff will come back with a process that works for you.
Okay, great. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
The delegation department.
Yeah, I think May wants to. Give it a couple minutes.
You're in better.
Do you want to go get May?
No, I will do it. I just wanted to let the delegation depart first.
The whole OCP change.
So when do you get out? Tomorrow?
And even in this large map that you look very closely, you see that there's no crosshatch in there. You see there's no crosshatch in those particular sections.
But it's Hello, May.
So, if I may, Your Worship, I was a minute. Oh, Your Worship, Your Highness. I was a minute too late coming in, and the meeting had already started, and I would have had to have excused myself from this item. I just spoke to Mr. Gilbert, and so I would explain that's why I did not come in.
Thank you, May. Mr. Gilbert?
And that's just consistent with previous declarations of potential conflicts of interest declared by Councillor Reid in past meetings. Item 2 is minutes of the Council and Committee meeting held on Monday, July 17th. Recommendation to approve.
Second.
All in favor? Opposed? Carried. Next item.
Next item 3 is the Development Application Review Project, DARP. Majority promised by the General Manager of Plan Development, a presentation by the Director of Development Services. Reports before you for information.
Mr. McIntyre.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chairman, and again, good afternoon. Just a few opening remarks from my perspective before I hand it off to George. Obviously, it's very clear there's considerable development activity and interest currently underway in Coquitlam. And on one hand, especially for a city planner, it's an exciting, transformative time for the community. There's a lot of neat things happening. But with that volume and increasing complexity of applications, there's also been concerns raised about efficiently and effectively processing applications. Concerns been raised at council as well with some of our stakeholders. And one of the corporate business plan priorities has been the transitioning in the development services area. Now, in that regard, we're very, very fortunate to have brought George Fuji on board with us. He's been here a little over a year now as our Director of Development Services, and George comes to us with considerable experience from the city of Vancouver and Surrey, and it's a little bit of time in Maple Ridge too, but he's been a great addition to our development group, the leader in that area. And so once George was on board and getting up to speed, made clear one of the key responsibilities and mandates for that position was to lead a review of our development application processes. And George took that on with some relish and initiated what we're referring to as the DARP, Development Application Review Project. And we're here today with some the findings that have come out through that process, some of the steps that we're implementing now, and some ideas going forward. So we see this as being critical to addressing that business plan priority, but also critical for us just to keep our heads above water and keep things moving. So with that, I'll hand off to you, George.
Thank you, Jim. First of all, I struggled for about 3 days to come up with an acronym that would easily roll off people's tongues, though. So
When you came up with
this is the best I can do, Mayor. You'll see some other ones later this afternoon. So earlier this year, we did engage an outside consultant to help us undertake a review of our current application processes and procedures, and with a view to sort of looking at what we can do to sort of improve our processing times, to reduce turnaround times, sort of to look at areas where we can become sort of more efficient and effective in terms of our operation, and all clearly to maintain the high levels of customer service to our various customers, developers, residents, council, and our colleagues in other departments. The scope of the project, and a very high level, is that there is a discovery stage where the consultant met with numerous staff, not only within planning, but engineering, legal, the various divisions involved in the whole review process. There's a lot of hands and fingers involved in the review process. Then took a deep dive, so to speak, and looked more specifically at a few application types, and provided some recommendations as to what we as a city could do to better to improve our processes. Whoops. So, at a high level, the activities involved sort of our process, a review of our process and decision-making procedures, and we focused on development permits, rezonings, subdivision, and our pre-application review application. The consultant had a look for us at our current data and metrics review, or perhaps, as I'll discuss later, lack of, or we can do better on that. And then had a look at our current application tracking software, our Amanda, which is our sort of workflow and data management system. So what were the results of the analysis? A couple of things which came out is that with our current application processes perhaps haven't evolved as they should with over the course of time, as Jim pointed out, the increasing volumes over the last several years, and not only volumes, but the complexity of applications. We've got high-rise, high densities, the various policy initiatives that council's asked us to look at as far as affordable housing and things like that. They've all added a bit more sort of complexity to our processes, and then sort of more people involved to sort of, to move things along. In terms of the process numbers, just for your information, since 2012, and there's a graph within the report, the city has received at least 150 development applications per year, and last year we had received over 200. And year to date in 2017, to the end of June, to the end of June, it's about 181 development applications. So clearly, we're going to sort of, based upon the year to date, exceed those record volumes which we received in 2016. Not surprisingly, one of the findings was that the processing time is significantly related to the quality of applications that we get from our applicants. We have sort of tightened up on sort of accepting or not accepting incomplete applications and the poor quality ones, but I can speak to a little bit later, which is beginning to help in terms of the our ability to look at things in a timely manner. Lack of resourcing has impacted some of our processing times. We have had some vacancies over the last year, but been quite successful in filling, I think, almost all, majority, if not all of the vacancies. So we're going sort of full throttle now, and that, filling those vacancies has been really helpful. One of the sort of things that the consultants have identified for us is a lot of decision-making here with regards to development application review is done by committee rather than, maybe an individual or individuals sort of taking the lead and just actually making a decision. It's great, we've got a very good cooperative, consensual sort of organization here, but going back and forth 3 or 4 times sometimes doesn't lend itself to a quick turnaround. And the final sort of high-level finding, which our consultant identified, was that the way Amanda is currently configured is it could probably be sort of upgraded or configured a little bit better to allow us to sort of the staff to work more efficiently, to use the software that we have, and also to be able to provide better sort of performance metrics. So, I've got some numbers here. Currently, it's taking us about 12 to 18 months to complete a rezoning development permit subdivision, and which is a long time. But for me to try to even derive those numbers was an exercise in itself. And so the Amanda software can be configured to make it a bit more user friendly for our staff, and to drive better numbers for key performance indicators that we can report back to council on a regular basis. So the 49 specific recommendations that the consultant sort of provided, and I didn't attach the recommendation report to the staff, to the council report, but they are available for review. We can provide a copy to you if you want to drive or work through 49 specific detailed recommendations. But essentially, the consultants classified it into 3 groups: people, process, and technology, recognizing there's a lot of overlap between those 3 areas. And a number of sort of key recommendations have came out. For the far as the people part goes, is, again, clarify roles and responsibilities, the decision-making process, try to develop service levels, not only internally but externally, like how long it might take, actual dates, target dates, those sort of things. And another important one is to ensure that everyone involved in the development application review process looks at it as a high priority. The staff in different departments, or if they're involved in so many different things, sometimes it's hard to juggle the various tasks that they're involved in, and not very often, but on occasion the development stuff sometimes gets maybe not as top of mind as it should be, at least from my perspective as the Director of Development Services. Empower staff to make those hard decisions and do their jobs. There's, as I said earlier, there's been a long tradition of sort of consensual committee-type decision-making. So there's a people piece, like a real change management piece there too. But so we're working hard to sort of, empower staff to make those tough decisions. The Amanda software, in terms of from a business point of view, no one's really taken ownership of it. It's like, no, you do it. No, you do it. And so the consultant is saying that, it's development planning or development services is the group that uses it. That's the key thing. So you need to take ownership to drive the changes in that area. And we're more than happy to do that, subject to a few things which I'll talk about later on in the presentation. And, another key thing is for our development servicing group to take on more of a proactive role as acting as the interface between engineering and public works, the various assets there, and our development planning folks to rather than the planner getting, say, 2 or 3, 4 memos from 4 separate people in another department, they would be consolidated through our development servicing folks and our, again, Robert Cook, who's our new development service, not new anymore, coming up for 1 year, similar to myself, has done a really good job in sort of bringing that group on board and making some changes and trying to drive things forward. As far as the process piece goes, and there's, again, this is coming from the consultant who's saying that you guys should just, City of Coquitlam should look at more sort of risk-based project management, with a view to sort of, certain applications which are defined as, maybe not as risky, to go through quicker reviews. That's the kind of stuff that we need to work with closely with our colleagues in various departments here, because risk-based means taking a chance, but I think what we'd like to do is look at measured risk, though, right, to move things along. But like I said, that's something that we'll really need to cast our minds upon more carefully, and before we implement that more fully, we would come back to council and describe to you in more detail what we mean by that. Right-size the application review process. As council, one of the things that the development industry really likes about our department or the organization here is that we provide a pre-application review. But for $588, we can spend, good number of weeks, even months on a pre-app thing. So the question comes up, we've got the paying customer who's got a full development application in, and so what do we do? So relatively speaking, how much effort and time do we do at a pre-application review relative to a full paying customer? So those are the kind of things that we want to look at. Is the right size of process, though, and we've got a number of long-standing committees who've served the development planning and organization really well for many years. Subdivision Advisory Committee, Development Review Team. Like I say, they've served us really well for many years, but it may be time for a refresh. And so one of the recommendations is just sit back, have a look at revisit the terms of reference for those groups. Or, are they still providing the value that they did, say, 6, 7, 8 years ago when volumes were lower and complexity wasn't as high? And another key recommendation is to, rather than doing things on a monthly basis through committees, is begin to look at rolling reviews. So we don't have to wait for 4 weeks before. Not that we do now, but in terms of a lot of the decision making is made in the committee on a once a month basis. And again, you're sitting there. You might be sitting there for 4, sometimes 8 weeks if you missed that first submission deadline. So work towards rolling reviews, again, which will require some sort of rethinking and possibly some resourcing issues there. Clearly ensure staff have enough time to do property quality checks. This is another important one to me, is to educate our applicants and enforce application completeness and quality requirements. And we're doing that. We're getting a bit of pushback, but, at the end of the day, the better quality, the application at the outset, the quicker things can take place. We're not chasing people to submit, the different pieces of information, though. So, but it's all gonna, there's some sort of shifting of people's expectations and stuff that we're engaged in currently. And, the other one is, and again, it's related to technology as well, is the, standardize and broaden the use of our software that we do have now, and to track key project milestones, which in turn will allow better metrics and better data. And then, I was taught this a good number of years ago, that it's really hard to manage something if you can't measure it. And it's I know it's sort of an old saying, but there is some truth, and particularly in a like these development application processing things. technology, again, is to upgrade the Amanda, and I won't go into that, but that is a key recommendation that's come out of the review. Staff did meet, well, we met with the UDI has taken quite an interest in this whole exercise, and they've created, the Coquitlam chapter of UDI has created a processing subcommittee, and a subcommittee I think was even larger than the Coquitlam committee, but so there's been a lot of interest in that, and and one of the areas that they identified that that we can perhaps do a better job is on the development servicing, the review of servicing drawings. So as I pointed out earlier, there's a lot of things which are in these sort of the planning stages, and things which we've already implemented to help the reviews, such as the supervisors and manager getting involved right to break those bottlenecks and get involved in complex projects and provide more guidance to the staff. We've taken on we've prioritized multifamily commercial building permit referrals that come from building divisions. So those are get sort of to the queue quicker because they're really important as far as economic development and other things go. And then we again starting, I guess, maybe a bit on some risk stuff. But, rather than asking applicants to continually submit new sets of drawings and so on and so forth, we've started using more sort of acceptance with amendments on drawings. So there's not multiple. Every time you ask a consultant to provide a new set of drawings, that doesn't happen overnight either. And then following up on the presentation staff council received a few weeks ago on the e-plan and digital submissions, we've started using preliminary use of digital review in development servicing using the Bluebeam software, which again begins to eliminate some paper and allows for more sort of working smarter, shall we say. Now, having said that, and I've talked about things that we're going to do, but there's a few, I guess, the short-term customer service enhancements that the report identifies that we'd like to implement. One of the ones I think is a very simple one, which is a development application best practice, is have developers install development proposal signs, long before an application comes to council. Prior to public hearing, because I don't know how many times, at least I have been sort of caught a little unprepared. You come to public hearing and there's all these issues being identified, which we should have known about as staff much earlier, but because of perhaps our engagement process so far with terms of the public process with regards to development applications, I think could be better. And, having development proposal signs put up and so people can phone in and ask questions, provide commentary early on would be helpful for both staff and I believe council as well, though. And the other sort of short-term thing that we like to do is, when I first arrived here, I thought, I read my fourth reading report. I was reading it, I'm going, this sounds like a first reading report. There's all this stuff about this and that and so on and so forth. And I thought to myself, no, we're asking council to review these not only lengthy reports, but multiple times these lengthy reports. So one thought would be to better consolidate, the various applications in one report. So, for example, we don't provide you with a report on a development permit at the fourth reading stage, but we will talk about more details about the development permit right in the first reading report. So, with the view being that it would provide an applicant a sense that they're headed in the right direction right at first reading. So there's, hopefully there'll be no surprises as far as some design issues identified sort of later on in the process. And also I think from the council's perspective, what we like to do is, with the fourth reading report is, probably a maximum 2 or 3, 2 pages, let's say, versus the 10 pages, where we sometimes reiterate the first reading report. So just consolidate things and try to open up your time to do other things and read forth reading reports all the time. So where are we headed now? We need to prepare a detailed project plan to schedule, prioritize, coordinate, and resource the implementation of the 49 recommendations. Having said that, as you know, the volumes are high, complexities are high, and staff are struggling just to meet their day-to-day needs quite often. So there are there will be some resource requests to council as part of the 2018 budget process for a couple of new positions within planning and development, and also in the ITC group and finance. The first position would be along the lines of what we call more of a business services position, right within planning and development, who would deal with and oversee all the various sort of customer initiatives that we do, including overseeing the implementation of the DARP recommendations, dealing with not only on the development planning side, but on the building side, the front counter, all of those customer service things that, we do a good job, but I think we can do a better job. And also to move forward with the Amanda piece, we're looking for a term position in a range of 2 years to sort of really drive the Amanda upgrade position. So this would be a position embedded within planning and development, but who would work really, really closely with our colleagues in ICT and in finance department. And as part of that request, the idea would be the ICT would dedicate 100% of an existing staff member to drive the Amanda exercise, but they'll be looking for a backfill, so to speak, for that position. So again, a lot of great stuff coming out of the report, a lot of things that we have done and we're going to drive forward, but to really make this a successful project, that we will be seeking some additional resources as part of the 2018 budget. And that's my presentation. I apologize I went on too long, but it's a lot of material, and so any questions and comments that Jim and I would be happy to take.
Thank you. Yeah, it was an important process. We talked about it a lot. Councillor Reid.
Thank you. I've had my pick at the kitty in development services, so I've just got a couple of questions. Somewhere in here you said prioritize. I gather you're still going to be taking like the little applications for small garages and add-ons and that separately. You're going to separate those processes. So the small houses to a total house to a subdivision to a multiple story high rise. They are going to be different processes, correct?
The level of review, I think, for the smaller projects, it would be much less complicated than for a larger project. And one of the things that we want to try to get away from...
My question on prioritizing is if you have 10 little guys and one big one, you're not going to prioritize the big one and let the 10 little ones last. I assume they'll go to another stream within the department. Will they, the little ones?
That's correct. Essentially, that's the concept, yes.
Okay. So we've had Amanda around, and being the techie on council, which is not... Amanda obviously hasn't been doing the job we expect it to do, right? Probably because it's becoming sort of complicated. So I guess, my two questions are, is Amanda the right system for us? Or are we just going to add on to a system because we've got one? Is there a better system that we could be using?
Mr. McIntyre.
Yes, thanks, Mr. Chair. Let me try to respond to the first part of the question. I'll hand it back to George. Amanda has worked. I think the extent, though, that staff have worked with it has varied. And I think in fairness to staff, though, like it was in place when I came here almost 15 years ago. And Councillor, you may be more familiar with this than I am, because obviously it was a transition at the time for the organization. It's not only really coming to a new city hall, they're going to new software, from the old paper-based file systems of the days of yore to the Amanda system. My first impression when I came here, I was impressed they had that, for one thing. But there's differing levels of use, I guess, dependent on that staff person's openness, aptitude to use those systems. We had at the time what we called system champions or leaders, and people who were more into it would sort of show the other staff. And so I think the take-up, it was there, but again, not consistent across. And if there's been some shortcoming, I would admit in time that we haven't pushed that level. More recently, though, with newer staff, younger staff coming on board, I think there's been a greater embracing of it. It still could be used more, and I think what George has found when he came here, that we're sort of, I wouldn't say scratching the surface, but we're not fully utilizing the capabilities of the system. As well, that there are Amanda upgrades that are available out there that could help take it to the next level. We certainly looked at its functionality when we got into the whole E-plan process. For example, are we going with the 21st century software system and marrying it to something that's behind the times? And I'm no expert in this area, but what I heard back, especially from our ICT people, was no. Amanda is a pretty good system, and George can speak to this. The consultant that came in, he's familiar with it. It works elsewhere. It's just that we have to advance that.
Well, that's okay. So we
and
have
the training
the right system, and we're going to add on to it.
I'll let George, if he wants to just respond a little bit.
Well, I think we heard George say yes, but we need, and I agree with a 100% person down in planning and working it and getting everybody using it. So I'm sort of getting where you are. I wanted to talk about systems. Now, in my business, and you have no idea how bad it gets, like right now I've got one. If there's a bunch of forms to fill out for something, it won't let me complete it. Won't let me complete the page unless everything's in. Amanda probably doesn't do that, because what I'm saying is, where some of the stuff I have to complete, I can never send it in if I can't complete all the information. So the question is that one of the updates you can do with the Amanda system?
1 second.
I was going to answer the question, actually.
Yeah. Shell Hunt.
I may ask Danny Bandier's help as well. He's the manager of ICT. To answer your question through the chair, I think Amanda's the right system. It's how we've configured it. So, for instance, your question around, being forced to enter fields, that's a configuration issue, and that's something that ICT would work with the business area, planning and development, to say, okay, what fields do you want as a mandatory field, and we would do that. So, it's really around how we're using the system, not the system itself, if that clarifies.
Okay, so that's possible. Thank you. Help at the counter.
Yep.
Amanda won't be that important on the small jobs. I'm talking garages and basements, and because if it would be, one of the large firms that they have actually at their counter now got someone. So if I came in with my little handwritten application, they would take it and sit down with me, and they'd input it right there. And so that all the information would be there, and you'd never take another handwritten application. And that way, we always got the information that we needed. So that's just an aside. Talking about fourth reading, there's something else coming up tonight, and I have a note on it. It's a long, involved report on something, and they've gone through it, broke it down into sections and all that, and that's great. But the next update that we do, I don't want to see the report redone. I really like it, and I think it was Terry that brought this up once, where if you're going to add or mention something about phase one or something, that you could leave the report the same and just scoot it in, as a red or blue or whatever you do. And then
a hyperlink.
Yeah, whatever you call it. Whatever. I think it was Terry, but I found that really useful, because then I could go back to what I really voted on in the first place and then see the changes made under the application. So I like that. And at fourth reading, my question would be, if we ever have a question about something at fourth reading, Are we able to access the file to find out our own answer instead of phoning you? If you don't know, that's okay, but it's something that might or might not be useful. I'm fully in favor of the staff positions you want, because I keep saying we got to grow there sometime. And that's about it. I had just the prioritizing and the Amanda. So I would like to see the system brought up and staff, sort of the old staff like I am, sort of taught what we need to do to use it, and also think about the customer service rep at the front counter to help people. Yeah. We could have a computer right there and they could bank everything in, and then we're sort of all on the same page. Thank you.
Mr. Chair, if I could just, Councillor raised an interesting question there at fourth, and I think it's very important, particularly some of the newer council members, and the city clerk can comment as well, but obviously you need to be careful once the public hearings close in terms of receiving new information, but because those reports were part of essentially the public hearing package, it's there if you need.
That's why I'm saying
if you need to go back and just remind yourself or check on something that should be certainly accessible to council.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. Councillor Hodge.
Yes, thank you. And great to see this report. I know we've talked about it. Council's talked about the need to try to speed things up. I think you said it best when you said, we do a good job, but we can do a better job. And I think that really, to me, hit home, because I think our staff do a good job. And they do a fabulous job. This is interesting because I recently went through a process, so I saw some of this. And what strikes me is that some of the things you said are absolutely bang on. I think the idea of committee, the cutoff for committee, if you don't get your application in or this document by 3 o'clock today, you're going to miss the committee meeting, and then the committee doesn't meet for another 30 days. So missing a day on an application can cost you 30 days in the overall process. And this is where we hear from the developer versus the staff perspective on things. Well, you didn't get your information in on time, that's why you missed the deadline. And there's this little bit of a back and forth that goes on. And that's referenced in the report about, well, we try to, as a city, we try to take information or applications in, but it may not be complete, and that leads to problems down the road. I get that. One of the things that I heard and experienced is we just thought you would know you would need this, or oops, we forgot to tell you that you also need. And when that comes in on week 16, and then you have to go back with that document to your civil engineer, who's also busy, that one piece of information that the civil engineer didn't include because he didn't know he needed it, because they don't do it like that in Maple Ridge or whatever, can then lead to a 4-week delay while it goes back to the civil engineer and comes back. And so I think that incomplete documents coming in is certainly a factor, but I think we also need to be more clear with developers, particularly ones that are small developers who don't know all the things, and then they suddenly get hit with this, oops, you should have known, or you didn't tell me. And I think that was one of the things that I heard a lot of.
Yeah, one of the specific recommendations that we're going to undertake is to make sure that our submission requirements list, both on paper and on the internet, first of all, I know about they're consistent, but to make sure that we, like in fairness to the development community, that we don't miss things out either. And so we're going to have a really good look at all of our submission requirements and to make sure that again, because the worst thing is an applicant coming to the counter saying, "But George, I give you everything your form says I need." Oh, I'm sorry, we forgot something. So those are kind of things that I recognize that we need to improve upon.
And I'm glad you're aware of it, and the consultant referenced that as well. So the other thing that comes to mind is delays within the system itself. Knowing this was coming through today, a developer contacted me and he said, the one challenge that I have is things like the PLA. When the PLA, some subdivisions I'm told are taking 2 months from the time that council passes the fourth reading or public hearing, it takes 2 months to get a PLA. And without that document, the developer can't go back to a civil engineer. So he waits 2 months for the PLA, then it goes to the civil engineer, and that can take a month. Now he's 3 months waiting to the next step. And there's one development that I'm aware of, and the carrying charges on this development, and it's just a subdivision, a land subdivision, it's $3,000 a day. So we're now talking $100,000 waiting for a document that really should just be an automatic sign-off, because all the paperwork has been done leading up to public hearing, all the drawings, the civil engineer drawings, and I think we have to find a faster way to get those PLAs back into the hands of the developers.
Exactly. So at a high level,
preliminary land assembly.
Yeah. What we want to work towards is you're right. Our current process, sometimes we don't delve into the details of the subdivision PLA until after public hearing and third reading, whereas with some of the changes that we would like to implement is we want to sort of at least give the applicant the choice. If they want to sort of engage in more detailed aspects of the subdivision, that we will entertain that. And, even before third reading, but knowing that there is risk involved for the applicant. So those are some of the things that, I'm a big believer in providing applicants, here's a choice. There's a number of things you can do. We can continue on with more of a sequential type of thing, but we do offer this particular service, which is sort of more comprehensive, shall we say. But there is risk involved, though. So I think if people know going into a process that what the risks are, that right, at least we can provide choices.
One of the other ones is that when there's a differences of opinion, and this comes up regularly, that staff person A said this is his interpretation, and staff person B has a different interpretation, and both of them are probably right, but the applicant is wondering, who is right, A or B, and if I disagree with this interpretation, what is the process to move forward? And it shouldn't result in a phone call to the mayor to talk to Jim. I think there has to be a process, a faster process. And I'll give you an example. On a project that happened up on Burke Mountain, it was a lot subdivision, and all the trees had to come down because they were in the way of where the road allowance was. So there was no question the trees had to come down. It left about 6 trees in an existing yard, and the developer says, I want to save these 4 anyway, so 2 might have to come down. And so there was a discussion about whether an arborist report was required. And it took 8 days, and I'm not requesting whether the arborist report was required or not, but when it was looked at, they sort of said, all these trees clearly have to come down. These trees the developer wants to stake out. These trees may have to come down, and the developer said, the owner is allowed to cut 2 trees a year anyway, so why do we need an arborist report? Now, it took 8 days for somebody to come back and say, yeah, you're right. In this case, we probably don't need an arborist report. So the staff was following the rules, which is correct, but then there's this common sense thing that comes in that says, do the rule really apply here? And who's going to make that decision? And in 8 days, that's $24,000. It would have been cheaper to just hire the arborist and get it done. So those are some of the things that I think that we need to look at, speeding the process and having that process in place where we can make decisions quicker. Right or wrong, whether the developer agrees or not, at least giving them an answer a little faster, I think, is one of the things that we need to do.
So one of the things that we have sort of implemented and will better implement is a quick sort of, shall we call it, a escalation decision-making process, so that rather than things floundering for 8 days or whatever it might be, that you get the appropriate people, and that decision's maybe made in 8 hours versus 8 days. So, but versus saying, going back and forth. So that's clearly on the radar for sure.
Good. I don't want to get into a lot, but I just want to say, I think this is timely. I'm pleased to see. I like the idea of the signage. I'd like to see us maybe do it on the smaller ones as well, not just the big ones. That, put some stuff on what's going on. Because I'm assuming we're going to do this on all of them. Correct? Is that any development would go forward?
That's correct. Yeah.
Okay. And that's, as I said, I'm really happy to see we're doing this. I think our staff does a fabulous job, and I think there's some cases where we could, as you said, we do a good job, but I think we could even do an even better job. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. I have myself next on the list here. A good report. It's something we've been talking about quite a bit. A couple comments. The signage now, is that, I guess we've had some issues where we had some that not complete details and the public mistook or didn't understand. So what level of detail will be, or how much detail will process in the application before a sign goes up? Will it be up as soon as a person makes an application without any real plan or anything saying that we're going to propose townhousing here, we think this amount of units, this amount, but there's no real plan involved? So I like the idea of the sign going up early, but I think lack of detail at times can give the public off track on what's really going to happen or create undue fears.
So what the thought would be is that we wouldn't require a development proposal sign for a pre-application, right, or an inquiry. It would be for someone who's paid the full, rezoning, development permit, or whatever fee, and that there'd have to be clearly sufficient information provided. The applicant needs to know what they want, what they're asking council for, right? And on occasion, the sort of the X number of units that they may have asked for in the initial, might evolve lower or higher as the application evolves. So, we'll be careful to use language like, approximately so many units and so on. But it's at the end of the day, the applicant needs to know what they're asking council to approve before a development proposal sign goes up. And most of the customers that we get, they have a pretty good idea even before, even at the pre-application level when they come see us, though. So
you're asking more detail probably from them up front before they get to that stage.
That's correct. Yeah.
Oh, okay.
May I have a point of clarification on your question?
Okay, go ahead.
How you are the only ones that have jurisdiction over signs. I thought council actually had to approve the development at some stage before, under the Real Estate Act, that they could put a sign up. That's
Mr. McIntyre.
Yes, thanks, Mr. Chair. Yeah, that's right under the real estate legislation. It's correct that I think that what that turns on is the marketing. If they're marketing a project, it has to have received through approval in principle. This would be an information sign in a standard format, and it's not for offering units for sale.
Okay, that's good because we had a certain place that put up its signs and hoarding signs saying almost like it's approved. So the signs. I think that's what you're getting.
Exactly. That causes us a great deal of problem as a council.
Thank you, May.
And if I could, the signage is an interesting thing. It's one area where we've been a little slow. But also thinking, too, as a project proceeds through the process, given the line of questioning and George's response, that's the initial, what the developer is proposing. It's important to put their name and numbers out there, too. It's not just the city that would be contacted. But then as it goes through the process, public hearing, you have to make sure that that's being accounted for as well.
My other point is that, and this has been said sometimes, there is consistency in your decision making. You talk to developers sometimes that there's inconsistencies in what's applied here that wasn't applied over here, and there seems to be confusion at times. So I think as we get through this, we need to make sure that the consistency of the decisions that are coming out of planning are the same for all developments going through. I think the issue you talked about, Amanda, I think we need to be, Amanda's been around time, we've talked about tweaks to Amanda or improving it, but I think the staff training is really key to make sure that they fully utilize it at all times and work with the finance and technology to expand its abilities to create our better processing times and stuff like that. So that, I hopefully, we got a 2-year process, but I think that's something that the department, I would like to see on an ongoing basis, looking at how you can always upgrade, expand, and improve staff training on that. Because I think, Mr. McIntyre, you mentioned a couple times that we had training that seemed to, maybe my impression was maybe it slid a bit or whatever. So I think we're in an age of electronics. I think that staff are more used to it today, and it's just an acceptance factor. But we have to be more on top of that as we go through with our technology and moving it forward and being on top of that more. But that's for me. Councillor O'Neill.
Yes, thanks very much. And since we're talking about the signage, the question about the development application sign, so at the bottom of that, you're going to have the agent or the applicant's name and phone number and email address, plus City of Coquitlam Planning Development, phone number, email address. So remember, the public sees this, phones that phone number or sends an email. How does that get handled? Is there somebody, a gatekeeper, who is fully informed about exactly everything that's out there, all the signs are up, and then where to send the email or where to direct the phone call?
At the end of the day, the public comments, questions would go back to the file manager. So he or she would manage that public piece and sort of log the information coming in, and then what we will work towards is advising council of those sort of, should we call them pre-council comments as part of the reports.
File manager's phone number will be on here, or central office phone number? I just don't want to see somebody at the front desk answering the phone and head comes up and says, "Who's handling this file?" or something like that. I just got to have a good system here, and I want to make sure this is all thought through here and doesn't lead to more public frustration.
No, if I could, through the chair, that's a really good question. I know you've got quite that detail of the flow, but generally there's a general inquiry line that's has coverage, and people will be aware. And I think what this calls for is having a tracking system that's kept up to date, so there is that backup and knowledge. Because if you rely on the file managers, they're very busy, and sometimes they're away ill, sometimes they're on vacation. And we do try to have backup for them, but it wouldn't have that ongoing, consistent backup that you'd have in a general inquiry number. So we'd have to make sure there's a system in place to track and respond on
Thank you. That's exactly what I want.
Because the one thing, Councillor, that we want to avoid is people feeling they're getting the runaround and not getting hold of the right person. So
then they might sympathize with the developer a little bit if that happens. The old sense. Just a little joke there. I've got more.
Could I just add on to that for a second?
Sure.
Okay. If there's going to be a sign out there and we're going to get more information, what's that going to do to staffing resources? I think that should be, because you want to be able to respond, and if there's more people inquiring with signs going up, is it going to lead to more workload within the department?
Should be to developer only.
Sure. Okay. Exactly, and I will segue into my second to last question. Anyway, I want to get to something else that struck me right away, and struck me again when Mr. Fuji was describing the front loading of all the information for council into the first reading and making sure it's not fourth reading is not too detailed and things like that. So council has in the past several times over my experience become quite confused at first reading over, and I'm guilty as anybody, over what we're dealing with. Land use, a rezoning application is for land use. And the way I read this is there's going to be more information about what's actually going to be going on to land, the detail of the development and everything. We already get a lot of that, and that's what throws us off. And I don't know exactly how we can be observant or more careful about making sure that council doesn't get further thrown off from keeping our mind on land use. What's the best use for this land? You thought about that, the implications of that? Are we going to be almost looking at, I don't want us to be 99% looking at a development permit application of some sort instead of a rezoning. That's a concern that I have. So if you haven't thought about it, maybe this is the opportunity to take it back with you or respond if you want to.
Yeah, staff have been really mindful of the, trying to sort of the land use versus design pieces in the first reading reports, particularly when it comes to the public hearing piece where it's, the proposed zoning bylaw amendment, which speaks to more the land use piece. But, I think where we're coming from is that in order, not only council, but particularly our residents, where you could have, a proposal or rezoned, say, to RM2. But I think there are residents to be able to sort of make an informed decision about an application. I think they need to understand sort of what the thing's going to look like, right? Because I think oftentimes you go, oh, well, townhouses sound good, or it could be a case that you could have a good design townhouse project or a not so good design townhouse project, and I think it's very difficult, I think, to sort of separate out sort of design from land use. To me, they're all sort of linked together, right?
Well,
that's a debate, I guess we can have.
I have a problem with that. Good design. Our job is land use primarily in zoning, and I said there's the issue. Then we have to be careful about this. If it's a matter of good design or bad design, it's up for council to decide anyway. I mean, that's really. Anyway, take that away with you.
No, I understand. Yeah.
Now, on the proposed new resources, and maybe even more than the positions you laid out, if it's seen that you need a person to handle all the phone calls and emails that are going to be coming in as a result of these signs, I don't think so. So this, and it's happening in the context of a historic real estate boom and growth in the city and everything like that. Will it still be there in 5 years, 10 years, 20 years? So I don't know. I really want to make sure that there's not something in place that automatically just keeps all these positions there, regardless of the busyness of the business. That there's sunset clauses, automatic reviews, and I know the good managers do this, but the public needs to hear this too. Council needs to hear this. That there's going to be a very close watch on these positions. That if they are not needed, that the positions will be allowed to dissolve and disappear or something like that. That's certainly in your mind, I hope.
Mr. Chair, if I could, maybe I'll respond to that as the general manager. No, we get it. I guess my initial response would be, it's not just throwing more hands on deck, it's doing a better, smarter job with what we've got and the systems we've got. But clearly, we're in the middle of a boom right now, and how long that'll last, who's got the crystal ball? All indications are it's continuing for some time, and certainly the number of applications and inquiries and proposals we've got in, it's just like all points of the compass. If things were to tail off, certainly, we look at those numbers. Certainly through the budgeting process, we do projections in terms of development application numbers and revenues and building permit applications and construction value and revenues of that. So it gives us that annual sort of checking on what we anticipate in terms of activity, and with that, there's the moderation of what the capacity is. The other thing I would point to as well is, and we're very rarely 100%. There's always some turnover happening, especially when you get into a department and an organization this size. We're doing pretty damn good right now, and that's some of the lowest vacancy numbers I can remember. But there is turnover, and so in that, it gives you an ability to manage that over time. In fact, we did that some years ago when there was that downturn in 2008, 2009. There was a vacancy management interim program we responded to just to sort of weather that downturn, and it didn't turn down very deep or very long for Coquitlam. But obviously we're mindful of that, and we would keep an eye on it.
But finally, in terms of these proposed new positions, that it's probably too early to figure out where the funding would come from, but I know that in growth-related issues and sometimes we can link, especially a short-term time-fixed position, to capital rather than tax-based and things like that. You'll be presenting all those options, I guess, to us as we go forward. let the record show the general manager is nodding his head.
Absolutely.
Thank you very much, and that's it. Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you.
Councillor Wilson?
Thank you. And just in relation to Councillor O'Neill's questions about the funding, you also talked about potentially increasing the application fee as we go along. And we've heard, all of us have heard over and over that developers would be happy to hire a planner to deal with this. So I'm sure if we're making it much quicker and more streamlined, increase in fee probably won't be that hard to swallow. I'm just going to pick up on the sign issue. I think it's a great idea as well. This happened to be in Kelowna on the weekend, and on their signs, write in nice, big, good-looking letters, it says, "This is your neighborhood." And I thought, wow, like that's a friendly way of catching your attention, right? And so I'd like us to consider, I mean, the mock-up here is a mock-up, and it's fine, but I just, this is your neighborhood. It makes you think, yeah, this is my neighborhood. I have a say in what goes on, and it just kind of makes you think that you have a little bit more ownership. So on that sign, would we have a website address for more information on the project? Because I don't see it on that mock-up. And I think, in this day and age, it might save people a lot of time rather than making phone calls to actually be able to go to the website. And if we are going to put a website address on there, I would like us to include a link to the neighborhood plan for that area, so that if somebody's really interested, they can actually go see the neighborhood plan and say, oh, this has been approved. And it's because we get a lot of people say, how can you do this in my neighborhood? Well, we spent 2 years consulting the neighborhood and made these changes, and it's all part of the neighborhood plan now. Oh, okay, well, I didn't know that, right? So if we're going to put a website address, then I think we could put a link to the neighborhood plan on the website, just to give it some context. And last thing on the signs is, we heard the last public hearing about, our placement for public hearing signs and all that sort of thing. We got a letter about another person about, the Austin Heights one coming up saying, the sign was in a bunch of trees and stuff. There's statutory requirements, but I think there's nothing wrong with us going above and beyond the statutory requirements sometimes to try to make sure that the public really gets that information, that we want their feedback, that we want their consultation, that we want them to come to the public hearing. And I know we advertise 3 times in the newspaper rather than the required 2 and all that sort of thing, but if we can try to make that process a little bit more robust, that'd be great. And I'm so happy that this is happening, right? We've told you in the past that we want to provide more resources if that's what you need and all that sort of thing. So I'm so happy it's happening. When I was looking through it, it looked to me like it was geared more towards the large developers, the larger multifamily projects and that sort of thing. Is that correct, or is it for the whole spectrum? Councillor Reid asked about the small builders and that sort of thing, and there's a different sort of stream maybe for that. But the kinds of improvements that you're talking about here, are those going to be also the same kind of improvements that a person who builds 2 or 3 houses a year would follow? Or are they the same kind of processes that a renovator would follow?
If I could, Mr. Chair, great question. But let me just make clear, there's an overlapping of applications, and I think where Councillor Reid was going earlier gets more into the building side, and certainly the building side, like we have more streams with our application. We've talked, recently about TIs, tenant improvements, building renovation, major projects, and so on. So I think in the building permits division, they're more sort of geared and have been structured to deal with different types of applications. Remember, we were talking about moving to a stage of being actually able to issue the TI, the tenant improvement, simple, straightforward, right at the counter that day. On the zoning side, the development application side, and George can speak more to this if he wishes. I think that's what they're getting to. That we got a rezoning process, and on one hand, we have to follow what's in the legislation and our procedures, but I think what we're recognizing that not all rezonings are the same. There's simple, straightforward ones, and there's major ones. And so it's making sure that the level of effort, the level of processing going into a more simple, smaller, straightforward application is not the same, extensive process that you would have with the major ones. So I think that what they're trying to do is maybe differentiate, meeting statutory requirements, but differentiating depending on the size and scale of an application.
Yeah, so that's where the report talks about right-sizing and review process, depending upon the level of complexity and those sort of things. Because, if someone's applying for a rezoning to RT1 to subdivide their lot into two. Through a housing choices thing, that applicant shouldn't have to go through the same process as someone proposing a 60-unit townhouse project, right? So it's a matter of right sizing and ensuring that, yes, the level of review is there, but that we don't get too carried away, shall we say?
Well, and that was the exact example I was going to use in my follow-up question. Because people are not doing as many RT1 subdivisions because of the owner's amount of work, and they're building a monster house instead, right? So this process that is being created will streamline that type of rezoning as well.
I will say yes. Like I say, based on the principle that it should be right size and things which are a council priority, we may have separate streams for those sort of smaller council priority type of housing choices programs.
With the one caveat that even with the housing choices application, typically there's a rezoning, there's a development permit, there may even be a subdivision too. For a single family RS1 or a large house, that's a building permit process. So we need to come at that different ways at a policy level in terms of the land use designation and the zoning, because as much as we improve our processes, you still have multiple processes to go through to get a housing choices versus a building permit for.
Yeah. So this can get us part of the way, but not the whole way on a small lot subdivision. Okay. Our pilot project, or our work towards more electronic plans, sounds to me like this fits right into that and streamline the process. The Amanda software, does this allow an applicant to track the application in the process, or is that just from a staff level?
At this point in time, Amanda has the capability for us to make it more available to an applicant. We're not there yet, though, but I know that the functionality is there to do that, so that, rather than an applicant phoning a member of council, or me for that matter, they should be able to go online and be able to sort of track to see where they are in the process. So I say, it's one of those things that we want to work towards. We don't have that sort of service, shall we call it, at this point in time, though.
But is that the goal?
Yes.
So if I'm a builder and I've been told, hey, you need to submit this, I submit it. A few days later, I should be able to go online and see that so and so received the document and it's in line to be acted on. Because I've heard of people saying I've given what they've asked and I didn't hear anything for a month, and I follow up and they say we didn't get it, and I know I gave it, and then they found it, but I've just wasted a month, right? But if I could track that online, then I would know after a week if nothing's been done. I could just do a follow-up email saying, hey, just following up to see that you got this documentation.
Unfortunately, I know at a high level, so what Amanda can do, whether it can drill down to that level is something that we'll have to review as part of the broader exercise. So
It seems to me the software that we were using for building inspections had some of that capability or something, didn't it?
Mr. McIntyre.
Yes, thank you. And certainly Danny's more the expert in this than I am. But that was one of the functionalities we were talking about with the E-plan process. Is it basically is to provide a electronic connection between the applicant and their designer and the city, and bring it in electronically, having it distributed to the various review areas, getting comments back. Now, mind you, that puts an onus on everyone being up to speed, using the system, putting their comments in, because when you have gaps, then the system starts to fail. But with the E-plan, one of the things we discussed was the potential or opportunity for applicants to check in and see where things are at relative to their application in the system.
But this is a much, so that's the plan, but we're talking about a much larger process. We're talking about the application for rezoning and all that sort of thing.
Yeah. And I should probably let George speak to this. He's more up in the details than I am. But with the position that's being proposed, and the business analysts in particular, and working very closely with ICT, is to raise the use and functionality of the Manda system, making it a more powerful, more commonly used tool. At the same time, we're talking about layering on an E-plan system that would plug into Amanda, so you'd receive things electronically, review it, distribute it, comment back. And so it's the connection of those two sort of initiatives. You're getting into a high-tech area where you need that expertise to make sure those systems are working and being used, and people are being trained.
1 second. Michelle, do you have
Sorry, microphone.
Actually, Mr. McIntyre answered the question, but yes, there's this sort of, well, I would say there's three different sort of system pieces there. There's having Amanda at the right level upgraded and configured appropriately. There's having the E-plans software, and there was two of them, and then there's having the integration of both of them. And there's sort of three projects. There's three separate projects that would have to be managed, and the team that we're thinking of putting forward would do that. Does that help?
And I think it's awesome, right? And I think that we need to use the technology as much as we can, right? It's like owning a Lamborghini and driving it like it's a Chevrolet, right? I mean, it's so by all means, let's do everything we can to make sure that we're using it at the best levels.
Second gear.
Oh, I didn't know that.
And I'll leave it at that. But yeah, thank you very much for this. That's great. Thanks for your work.
Good questions. Thank you. Gilbert?
Yeah, I just want to comment a little bit on the earlier question related to public hearing signs. This is not a replacement for the city's public hearing sign, so it's early notification. I think the observation, I've heard council make it, I've heard staff make it, the public hearing is probably the least useful spot to provide certain amounts of input. It's really a binary decision at that point, approve or decline, get early feedback in, and that's what this does. I think the comments that we've seen recently on a neighborhood or larger area placement of public hearing signs is a bit of a challenge, because if you look at the Partington Creek one, the area that was under review was not accessible, right? It was in the middle of a forest. So the idea was to bring the signs out and put them as close as possible to areas that people might drive by, that they may not have had linkage directly to the land, and in fact often in that case didn't. And I think that's true with the Austin Heights one that's come through. There's no requirement for signs at all. It's 10 or more properties with 10 or more different owners. The other aspect is you want to put the sign on city-owned land, because if you woke up in the morning and there was a public hearing sign on your lawn, you might get different inquiries, and you'd probably make a phone call of a different sort. And so I think where staff was trying to go there was place signs, again, to get people aware that something was happening and to make the phone call to the page. We do like the website idea, and our public hearing signs do direct you to the public hearing page so that you could read the first reading report that is actually, here's what's going to public hearing, as opposed to this sign, which is more about the design and initial phase, and here's what we're thinking as we refine it. So I think there's just a little bit of different balance and different considerations going into each of the signs at different stages of the process. So just wanted to add that.
Okay. We got a speaking order. Is
Sorry.
it going to be quick?
I'll let you finish. I thought you were finished.
No, I got still other people on the speaking list here. Mayor Stewart.
Thank you. So a few years back, we managed to get the process that we currently use for public hearings, which is the item 1, item 2, item 3 signs. And that was intended to allow the person that comes home at the end of the day, like Friday afternoon, they come home and they see a development sign on the lot next to them, and all it says is public hearing, and they have to wait till Monday, but by then they've got petitions against the nuclear plant that they know is coming, and they find out it's a duplex. And so we ended up with the item 1, item 2, public hearing. So you go to public hearing / public hearing, and you key in the. This one would allow. How do we do the public hearing signage? This isn't the public hearing signage. This is a way before that.
Yeah.
We still do a public hearing sign.
Yeah, that's correct. Yeah.
And the public hearing sign looks significantly different from the development. And I'm not saying that its design isn't conducive to that. I think the two look almost disjointed if compared to that, and I don't know whether we redo the public hearing signs.
Our initial plan was not. I mean, we could talk about the timing. Maybe one sign comes down when one comes up, but the public hearing sign goes up at a specific period of time. It's post first reading. In fact, it's 10 days before the public hearing, which is our notification period. We can talk with planning development to, if they vend, to the appropriate degree, and if they shouldn't, then we can talk about the timing of one sign coming down and one sign coming up, so that they don't cause confusion. I think the issue would be, there's some specific information on here in which what the type of zoning is, the proposed, the map. I think there's some really good stuff here. As long as that's consistent with what's going forward to public hearing, your degree of conflict or the rub is lessened. But we can talk about how we evolve that through the process. And certainly George and I have had some discussions about signage and different aspects, and same with some of his staff.
Okay.
We want to eliminate the confused phone call, and we don't want to cause unnecessary angst in the community, and that comes from asymmetric information or people not understanding fully what's in front of them, and we try to minimize that.
Perfect. And I've always wanted us to be able to have some easy way on Friday night, rather than waiting till Monday morning, to locate this application. And right now, if take all of the first reading ones in the council tonight, and put then the 6-digit into the search box in our website, and it automatically produces the tonight's council agenda. And then you have to scroll down, which isn't necessarily perfect, but at least anyone with a little bit media
I could do it.
internet savvy could be able to work this out, and our internet guru would be able to over here. Using that 6-digit, is there some simpler way? Is there another way that we could get a connection using the 6-digit? And perhaps even dropping the hashtag 17 and dropping the initials, the two characters afterwards. The 6-digit is unique to that application, right? And I'm not trying to design it here. I'm just. No. I want it to be as simple as possible, so the resident just knows that if they go in and the sign may even say, put this number in the search box at coquitlam.ca, and you're done.
Yeah.
One of the things that we want to move forward to is to create again through the Amanda upgrade, is a project file. So right now we have, the sign might say there's a rezoning, development permit, and a subdivision, but the thought would be to create, like I say, a project file, and which would encompass sort of the full range of things an applicant is asking for. Again, we don't. Again, I know that Amanda is capable of creating a project file, but we're not there. And that was one of the detailed recommendation which the consultant was saying that, you guys in Coquitlam, you should create a project file as the, shall we call it, as the parent, and the various components would be children of the parent. So, and hopefully those sort of things will sort of help, alleviate the whole bunch of numbers and different applications that we have. My understanding with the file numbers, so it's sort of the system itself selects these or provides the numbers to us. So you may see on occasion a development application with a rezoning and a development permit. but the numbers aren't consecutive because someone else snuck in and created another memorandum filed between those sort of things, though. So I've asked that question, and I think that's something, I agree, that it's some of our file numbers are could be less confusing, let's put it that way.
If I could, to the chair, interesting question, and let us take that away. The simple civic address is a pretty common identifier. So we'll have a look at it. I know the question's also come up recently too about the way we list the reports in the council package, and I guess we can read it, but it's kind of oblique to others as to what these applications really mean. You know, where's the location? What's the project about? So I think it sort of relates to all that. It's just an easier, simpler, more understandable way of identifying a project.
Okay. And it applies to DVPs as well. So this could be something where the actual project is less expensive than the sign. I don't know, if you're, let's say it's an awning or a wheelchair ramp or something that needs a DVP in order to install, you can go board a variance or you go DVP, but the actual construction is nothing compared to getting the variance. And the sign, I don't think we need I just want to make sure that we're not requiring a sign for applications where we wouldn't normally.
Okay.
And it's maybe 1/4 of them that would just say, no, you don't need a sign. I don't know how to get the criteria for that. Just a couple of comments related to the sign mock-up. FAR is something that I think most council members around the country would know what that is, but some of them use different acronyms, and the public has no idea what FAR is. FAR is floor area ratio, but can we spell it out? And my last comment was, lost it. It was related to Councillor Hodge mentioned 8 days to get a decision to not require an arborist report because you can take down the 2 trees anyway. And you suggested that maybe we can get that decision in 8 hours. Is there any chance we could get the decision, like, you're right, that we don't need that, like right now? It's just, it might be a bad example, but I know of lots of cases where the person, it's just I'm sorry, I can take down the 2 trees anyway, so why don't I just take them down now and then apply? There isn't any reason for an extended amount of decision making. And we sometimes hear those really extended decisions, but from my perspective, sometimes it's the decision where we have to go talk to 7 people in order to, and it takes the whole day when it really is and I recognize the potential for someone to second guess the decision later as well, and that's my next one.
Mr. McIntyre.
I think in part the answer, the response there sort of hinges on this risk-based approach that George has been talking about. Civil servants tend to be very risk adverse. We follow bylaws and policies. It's the pretty rare civil servant that'll just all of a sudden out of the blue just say, yeah, no, you don't need it, because often it impacts in other areas of the organization. You got to touch base, but I'm using some extremes here. I think that's part of what we're trying to do is with this is empowering the staff, making things clearer, more straightforward, having that ability for staff to have discussions with senior staff, with supervisors, with managers, directors, so they can get that direction. And I think in the end, if we're fully prepared to empower staff and give them that latitude, that leeway, we've got to recognize that sometimes some decisions will be made that it won't be perfect, and so that's sort of that risk balance we need to be aware of. But certainly, I think again this is part of the thrust, as I understand it from George, is it's getting staff to be thinking more, and you don't need to get to that that committee talk around the table so everyone feels good about it. What's the bylaw say? What have we done in the past? What's reasonable? And try to reach a decision more quickly.
Well, it's the last word. Councillor Wilson just whispered in my ear the problem solving rather than rule following. What's reasonable, and how do we get to reasonable solutions? The onus is also on us, though, because we're going to, if you put a deadline that says Wednesday noon and someone slams his application in Wednesday at 11:59 a.m. and it's incomplete, and then we end up with that mess, and then council jumps on you because someone phoned us and said, "Oh, we got it in by noon and no one gave," etc. We have to be careful as well and make sure we don't jump before we hear from staff, and sometimes we do, and so that if staff have made a decision, we have to let them be reasonable and not second guess that to the extent possible. And secondly, we have to be ready to hear from staff before we make judgments about the applicants, because they come to us and we don't want to reward them if it turns out it was their fault anyway. Thank you.
Okay, Councillor Towner, please.
Thank you. I'll be quick. I just want to thank you for this analysis project. This has been a really good report and really thorough, really good discussion. So I want to thank you for that. But I wrote down that I love the idea of the signs. I live in the southwest of Coquitlam, and I get tons of phone calls and emails. People are curious. They want to know what's going on. And not that we don't want to hear from residents, but signage. And I love what Councillor Wilson said about this is your neighborhood, or something sort of friendly and welcoming on there. I love that idea. And links to how to get more information. I spent 4 hours yesterday at the coffee with the councillor at the farmers market. And most of the people, it was busy the whole time, people coming by to chat. And people have a lot of questions. They are curious. And it seems like if we give them more tools to pay more attention and get more informed and be more involved. And a few of the ladies are going to be coming out to the public hearing tonight about Austin Heights. So I think any colorful signs that are friendly and not confusing and don't have jargon, I think that's a really good idea. And it's just being transparent, and there's a lot going on in our city. So I was really excited about that. But I also made a note, there's no way to graph, the graph here on total development applications received, how to graph the complexity. Just in the 2.5, not even 3 years that I've been on council, and the policies that we've implemented, it's got a lot more complexity. You didn't even mention the HRAs, there's many more HRAs. So if you could somehow graph how much more complex some of these applications are, the graph would be off the chart here. So because of that, I do fully support having to get more staff. Anything to speed this up, have better customer service, streamline the processes. I support that. We have a lot going on in our city. So I support a lot of the tidbits that have been mentioned today, using our technology a bit better. And yeah, you have to complete the fields. Yeah. And it brings I don't think having staff time on hand-holding people for not bringing complete information, I think we have to move away from that. Again, reasonableness, but anyways, great discussion, and thank you very much.
Councillor Reid.
Okay, this is quickly on the sign. I agree with what Terry just said. It's what I was going to say. I like funny signs like "What's up, Doc?" but you can't really put that on. But "This is your neighborhood" would be good. But planning does what planning always does best, which is talk to people in things that they understand, but the average Joe driving home from work doesn't know what RT1 is. It could be a brand new Chevy or something. So what I'm suggesting is that we go to our communications department, because they come up with fun stuff, rebrand our sign so it is neighborhood friendly. But what I'd like to see on it that is missing is that something that this application has not yet been approved.
Yes. Yeah.
And that public hearing is pending or something, and I'll leave that up to communications. We're trying to we got a sign to talk to the reader, and the reader that we're trying to reach, this doesn't work. So that's what I'd like to say. Thank you.
Thank you. Don't rely on the public hearing. We want
feedback before the public.
Okay, excuse me.
Got that, but I'm just,
Raise their expectations.
Okay. It's no interest.
yeah, thank you.
Do we have a mover?
Just a follow-up question. At what point does the sign go up? During the pre-app? After first reading?
Prior to first reading.
Because one of the challenges that we have now, we've had a couple of projects that have sort of gone a little bit sideways because a resident either found it on the website or a developer started to do whatever it used to be, the 879, whatever, the pre-consultation. Council starts to get questions and things about a project that we haven't even heard about. So the concern is once the sign goes up, we as a councillor needs to know what's going on there because we will start to get engaged in that conversation. So I think there has to be a mechanism that when we notify the neighborhood, we at least have to know what's going on because otherwise we get blindsided with emails and questions about something that we don't know about.
Fair enough, and certainly with the amount of activity going on across the community, it's hard to keep track of it. A couple things there. Another great piece that George has stepped up with is the monthly reporting. And there's one that just came out last week. It was for May and June. And in that, Council will recall that we try to capture those various categories of from inquiry to pre-app to development applications. So, and we'll have a look at that in terms of just maybe signaling that a sign's gone up. My understanding was these signs would be installed at the applicant's expense following receipt of the acknowledgement letter. So acknowledge receipt of your application, here's the template, draft something up, we'll have a look at it. So it'd go up fairly early process, but we'll look at that. There was input from corporate communications, but we'll seek more. And I think we'll want to talk with City Clerk Suche as well on this.
Even just sending us a link saying this has just gone up. If you get questions, here's the link to the project. Just a way that we can match.
Yeah,
you know, 1000 Rochester.
Okay.
This.
Okay, could I have a mover and seconded? Oh, there's.
Sorry, so it's on the floor now, that's fine. Further to that, so on the weekend, for example, someone raises the question of the assembly that is on the real estate signage at the corner of Poirier and Austin. That's how they would raise it. They wouldn't raise it, do you know anything about 103-352? Do you know anything about 279 Poirier? They won't get the right address. They'll raise it in some, you know, that one that's over there near whatchamacallit, and I don't know anything about that. I don't even know how to look it up. I suppose I could try Poirier and hope that something comes back. So how do, you know, once that sign goes up, the public has more information than I do, unless I drive by and look at the sign. So.
That's a problem.
Figure it out.
Yeah.
I think we addressed part of that when a long time ago, when I first started, which wasn't that long ago, we used to get council permission to do an 879 process. Council, there would be a report from Jim's area, say we're going to do an 879 process. Council would be made aware, and then we go away, do that, come back with the first reading report down. I think the idea was to take away some of that process, and what staff undertook is at certain times to let council know when an 879, now section 475, was starting, so that you weren't getting those questions because people were getting letters. I think as Jim and George allude to, I think there's a moment in time where we could talk about this, and maybe it's, you know, Jim says at letter of acknowledgement, the applicant gets the template of this, and then I think it would come back and staff would say, yeah, that's the appropriate amount of information, and that template could be forwarded to members of council, so you would actually receive it electronically before it went up, because they'd have to go away and manufacture it at that point. So I think there's easy ways to do it, and in some ways maybe get it to you even before the sign hits the road, so to speak. But I don't want to go, that's just brainstorming. I haven't talked to George and Jim about that, but I think there's moments there where we can feed into getting you that information ahead of time.
Yeah, you're still not going to solve the problem at Poirier and Austin because that was not an application yet. Right. That was someone's thought. Then you have to track down the person whose thought it is. So. And
it will never solve the person asked you when there's a land assembly going on and people are knocking on their doors because staff doesn't know at that point. No one knows at that point. So.
Okay. It's been moved and seconded.
It has.
All in favor? Opposed, carried. I would hopefully in the next part we can just sort of keep to tighten up it, because we've got some other items here to get through. We spent a lot of time, which is important on this one. So our next item, please.
Next item, item 4, concerns mitigating the impacts of construction on neighborhoods. We have introductory comments by the Adjournment Manager, reports before you for information, and it's been moved and seconded.
One question on it.
Okay. Councillor Hodge.
I've got one question. Construction site information signage was developed for larger multifamily projects, which I think has worked really well because, you know, if there's something going on, here's who you call. But we don't do it on the smaller ones. Could we do it on the smaller ones as well?
Just really quickly, I'm smiling because I was anticipating this question as we had the discussion in the last item around the signage, and this is one where, and Doug can speak more to it, and actually I think he wants to make an introduction as well, where we want to be consistent with the building permits, and again, so it would be, you know, if you're just a single-family building permit application, you know, a sign should be up there for that, along with the apartment tower. That's the answer.
It can be just as much a nuisance, the guy next door who's pounding nails in and they're flying all over the road and they're not cleaning them up. Who do I call? Yeah.
Okay.
Moved, seconded.
Mr. Banner.
Through the chair, very briefly, if I may. Good afternoon, members of the committee. Happy 29th birthday, Mayor Stewart.
58.
I think I knew that, but I was leaving that one alone. I just
29 times 2.
it's just
Light than you.
Like a 2-lot subdivision.
Boy, I wish I thought of that one. Just very briefly, if I may, in the report it speaks briefly about our construction site officer. I'm very happy to introduce Michelle Wilson. Michelle. Council may recall Michelle was previously bylaw officer 2. During that introduction, I've shared some of her background, which is quite unique. I'd like to just share very briefly. Michelle was in the Royal Navy, and from there she went on to had to work as a constable in the UK, and I believe southeast England? Southwest England. So her unique skill set, I think we're very pleased with. I think it's proved to be very valuable to this role. So I just wanted to take a minute to introduce Michelle.
Okay, thank you very much. I have a comment here just on the being respectful, and I think, you know, we talk with your neighbors is like the third bullet down, and I really think when a project comes in, one of the first things you really should be doing, and prior to construction or when things are, is talk to your neighbors. I think that's key before anything, any excavation, anything else in there, is let your neighbors know that you're going to be developing, what's going to be going on. So I just think if it is put up more and bolded out more on this guide here, it would be more impactful to when the building permit's given out, to make sure that I really think there's a lot of problems stem from construction starts. We had in our area where I lived, construction started, the never came to us. There's all sorts of issues that happen resulting of that, and I think it's really enforced that the developer who's building something there go and talk with all the neighbors to deal with, you know, potential issues or concerns, and let them know that this is going to be happening, so they're prepared better. So that's just my one comment. I have next Councillor Towner.
Thank you. I just have a quick question. On page 2, the very last bullet, it says that the BPD is considering implementing a program requiring signage. Why is it just considering? How come we don't want to have signs up?
Is it, you're speaking to the last bullet?
Yeah, will the considering be changed to doing?
We will be.
Okay.
Yes.
So that just jumped out at me. And then on page 3, you talked about the bylaw enforcement notices. Have we had to issue any of those, the fines?
Through the chair to Councillor Towner, we have issued BENs, but we use BENs as a supplemental tool, I would say. Our most effective tool is a hold.
Yes.
We go to a site, we put a hold, it becomes Michelle's site. Michelle is then in full control of that site, and she will not release that hold until she's satisfied.
Excellent. Thank you. And welcome, Michelle.
And
that's it. Thanks.
Okay. Mayor Stewart.
Yeah, we've received very good feedback from several fronts related to Michelle's work, and I thank her for that, and I welcome her to that position. I think she'll do well. One of my pet peeves is the conversion of our, you got a residential neighborhood, single-family homes, and one of them becomes a commercial property for about a year, and then reverts back to residential. We allow signage, and it becomes just a mess, and it's the signage, the superfluous signage, it's the super save signs on their fencing. It's suddenly you can have 10 commercial signs on what is a residential property in a quiet residential neighborhood. And since they're all against our bylaw, can we not just let the builder know at the outset, no signs, or the one construction sign? And so when Dick's Lumber comes up and staples the sign to the telephone pole, advertising, he doesn't even supply the lumber necessarily, but he's advertising his services to everybody. Can we just get them to stop doing that? And I mean that with Super Save. When we rent signs for festivals, Super Save comes along and puts signs up. You know, they aren't even a sponsor. In fact, there are more Super Save signs at some of our festivals than there are for the sponsors. That it's as though they gave us the signage for free, the fencing for free. And quite often the signage relates to water back or some other system that they've got. It's got nothing to do with the fencing. It's just we need, I think, as much as possible to keep those residential neighborhoods residential, even while someone's building a new residence in the neighborhood. And that means keeping the boulevards empty and not storing lumber on the boulevards or garbage on the boulevards, and making the signage less of an issue.
Okay. Councillor Reid.
Mine is quick because I've brought this up many times. We have a lot of good builders in our area. We have some builders that are not so accommodating to our residents. And I believe if we have builders, and I know speaking to some of the department members that consistently just don't go by the good neighbor construction policy, don't do this, don't do that. I don't think I want them in the community anymore. So if we have builders that we're constantly having to hold on and they're just not holding up their end of dealing in our city, then I think that staff should let them know that they can go build elsewhere.
Okay. Thank you. It's been moved and seconded. Oh, sorry, Councillor Hodge.
I just had one follow-up question on this before. Bullet number 3 on page 2, it says create a working group which includes the departments responsible for the enforcement. What is the role of that group going to be? How often will they meet? And I'm just thinking, now that we have sort of Michelle on the job, is that just not what her role would be? Or I'm just sort of wondering how her role and the committee's role match, or what the need for a committee is.
Through the chair to Councillor Hodge, that's a great question, and I appreciate it. Currently, we've met twice. There's a thought. I was attempting to get a meeting before the summer construction boom. It didn't quite work out, so I'm looking in September. And I'd be remiss in not acknowledging the staff under Joseph, Raul, in bylaw under Stephanie. Everybody has a role here. This is a city issue. It's not a departmental issue or divisional issue. We all have our role to play. I think those meetings are good in that we all get together, we get on the same page. You're correct in that Michelle is basically the building permits division, eyes and ears in the ground. And for us to liaise between the other, for example, environmental services, under Joseph, the environmental worksite and bylaw officers who would take over out on the city boulevards and public space, any materials out there. Michelle will work with Bayla's group and attempt to make sure, again, we're coordinated and consistent in our messaging and the way we approach them.
So it's more a sharing of information, just an ongoing, not a sort of a working group that's going to meet once a month. It's sort of more just set direction and make sure everybody's on the same page.
That's correct.
Sounds good. Thank you.
Okay. Moved and seconded. All those in favor? Opposed? Carried. Next item, please.
Next item, item 5, concerns tree management within Streamside protection and enhancement areas. We've introductory comments by the General Manager of Planning Development, presentation by the Major Project Planner, reports before you for information.
Move proceed.
Second.
Mr. McInerney, do you have some comments?
Yeah, I do, Mr. Chair. Thank you. Council will recall that following several windstorm events in recent years, the Park Rec and Culture Department had brought forward a series of reports with recommendations for assessing and dealing with potential wind throw hazard. Now, one of the recommendations in those earlier reports was for the city to develop a more stringent assessment, treatment and monitoring program to more proactively deal with this issue. And Planning and Development had been tasked with developing that policy approach, and this report provides a preliminary findings and recommendations regarding that for moving forward. So we wanted to check in with committee today, share with you just where we're at, where we'd like to go. If you have any questions in that regard, by all means, we'll try to respond. You have some direction or feedback, that would be helpful. And based on all that, Chris and the team will take that away and come back with some recommended policies and bylaw amendments for council's consideration in the fall. Now, I won't go into the details of the report. I think it's quite well done, and Chris can better speak to that than me. But just a couple of things I'd like to note, that the recommended approach, it would take a more proactive policy basis, but it would work in conjunction with the city's riparian areas regulation, with the RAR. It sort of would augment that policy procedure. Would also want to note that this work was a little challenging. It's into multiple areas, but we did have the involvement and support of urban forestry and environmental services staff, and all staff are recommending this approach. And lastly, I'd just like to note that this initiative was carried out by Chris Jarvie. It's thinking from liquor to trees. But it was also under the city's well-established staff leadership development program, and this is a project that Chris took on. Under that program, he's very busy, as you know, with just his ordinary many applications and other policy work, and he took it on as a leadership project, and actually, I think, in a way, it was a good example of that. It was an ability to retain a consultant, an ability to lead a team and liaise with other departments and come back and report to council. So I'm very pleased about that. So with those words, Chris.
Thank you, Jim. Good afternoon, Chair, Worship, members of Council. I'm here today to talk about my SPEAS hazard tree management project. In addition to being my leadership project, it's also identified as a B priority in the 2017 business plan. And furthermore, it supports the corporate goals of achieving excellence in city governance, enhancing sustainability of city services and infrastructure, and support neighborhoods. So the presentation is broken down into 4 sections. We'll quickly go over the current regulatory context and background, key findings, the recommendations, as well as next steps. Right now, the city has regulated development in and around watercourses through establishing development permit areas in the official community plan. So these watercourse protection development permit areas were first established in northeast Coquitlam, where all development within 50 meters of the watercourse triggers the need for a watercourse protection development permit. As we've updated neighborhood plans in the southwest, like the Austin Heights, Mayardville, Burquitlam-Lougheed neighborhood plans, we've also embedded development permit areas within those plans as well. In those areas, though, it's any development within 30 meters of the watercourse triggers the need for the development permit. Further, we've also adopted the provincial riparian area regulations, the RARs, which are embedded into the zoning bylaw. When we're reviewing those watercourse protection development permit areas, we're reviewing it relative to those RAR regulations by the province. Through the RAR, we determine what the setback is from the watercourse. The Streamside Protection Enhancement Area, so SPEAS, is determined through that review. Qualified environmental professionals may determine what that SPEAS setback is based on the stream, how wide it is, fish bearing, what the topography is, all sorts of things like that. as well as we're looking at the wind farm boundaries in and around those areas, because one of the major components of that stream's biodiversity and ecological makeup is trees. And what we found is that over time, the trees that we've been saving weren't necessarily the best trees for retention, and we've had problems with them falling. So this is where our current policy is at odds with protecting public health and safety, as well as limiting the city's liability. So in 2016, Parks, Recreation, and Culture staff brought forward a report to Council outlining some of the challenges that we're facing as a city in terms of managing this public risk as well as the liability issue. And one of the things they suggested is that we should do a tree risk assessment of all the trees within the SPEAS corridors as well as within the wind farm boundaries. They went out, retained a consultant in Blackwell Associates, and the Blackwell Associates went out and looked at all the trees within those areas and did the tree risk assessment and identified a number of trees that needed to be removed. Parks, Recreation, and Culture brought back a further report to Council outlining the work plan and got approval for the budget for the removal of the trees as well as the replanting and restoration plans. The second component of that is that Council directed staff to update our current policies and practices and provide some recommendations on future approaches. So planning development staff, with the support of urban forestry and environmental services, went out and once again retained Blackwell and Associates and asked them to, first of all, review our current state, what our current policies, practices, and regulations are, to do a municipal scan of the region, what are some of the other best practices, some other examples from around the region, as well as some previously approved riparian area reports. So what they did is they came back and they said basically there's four main indicators that led to forest instability. Tree species composition, weather and wind, spear orientation, and the width of the reserve strips. One of the most commonly found trees in Burke Mountain is the western hemlock, which is susceptible to wind and is rarely a good specimen for retention in urban environments. It has shallow roots, it lacks a taproot, it's also susceptible to other health issues. As such, it can be a danger tree in high-risk areas. Weather and wind was also one of the contributing factors, and the frequency of wind events in excess of 62 kilometers an hour, I believe, which are where we start to see some of the issues, they're increasing in frequency. They used to occur once every 2 years or so. However, over the last 16 years, 13 of those years have contained major wind events. So the frequency is increasing, which is alarming, and it's also meaning we're probably going to face this problem in the future still. The orientation of that SPEAS is also important because where Burke Mountain is sited, it's open to the winds from the south where most of the winter storms are coming from. So the winds are blowing into the SPEAS. When the SPEAS is orientated north-south, you know, the bottom end of the SPEAS corridor is being hit with the wind and trees are falling that way. When it starts to shift to being east-west, now the whole boundary is exposed to that southern winds. So the orientation is another consideration. Finally, the width of the reserve strips. So essentially, the more narrow the strip, the easier it is for wind to penetrate it. So and another problem is once one tree fails in that narrow strip, it opens up the entire strip. So for wind to penetrate it even easier. Some of the additional factors that they discovered is that the higher risks are associated with the forest edges, the newly created forest edges, especially in that first 3 to 5 years where they're particularly vulnerable. So whether the setback was 10, 20, 100 meters, it's the edges that are going to continue to be the issues regardless of the width. We also face some regulatory challenges from other levels of government with Ministry of Environment and Departments of Fisheries and Oceans who were reluctant to see tree removal in some of the early RAR reports. There's actually one case where the Qualified QEP suggested that a number of trees be removed because they were unsafe. It was said no. And so as a result, the trees were retained and eventually they failed. I will note that the work we did last year with all the tree removals was in consultation with Ministry of Environment and Departments of Fisheries and Oceans, and they were okay with the approach that we did. Some of the past wind farming treatments didn't work. We didn't remove as many hemlocks as maybe we could have. As well, there was a suggestion that we could just spiral prune some of the trees, which would result in them being more stable. History showed us that that's not true. The strength of the Ministry of Environment's danger tree assessment for reviewing trees for their stability isn't rigorous enough in the opinion of our consultant. And really it's meant for more rural areas, whereas areas like Burke Mountain, where there's more urban interactions with humans, in those areas we really ought to be using a more strict methodology rather than that danger tree assessment. So they outlined a number of recommendations. I've identified kind of the key ones here on the presentation as well as in the report. What they suggest is we do require more rigorous tree risk assessment right up front using the different methodology, which would identify early on trees that are high risk and potential for fail. We also require that the qualified environmental professionals include on their teams registered professional foresters or an ISA certified tree risk assessor. That we'd also then have the removal or mitigation and restoration of those areas, as well as implement a 5-year ongoing monitoring and maintenance program where the developers would be responsible for that work. If we get the feedback today, and without, unless we're directed otherwise, our staff will continue to prepare these amendments for Council's future consideration later this year. And prior to that, though, we'll be doing some consultation with the industry, development industry, as well as some other key stakeholders. Thank you for your time. If you have any questions, I'd be happy to try and answer them.
We'll start off with Councillor Reid.
Well, having lived the trees here for so many years and all the problems that we had and the width of the RAR and the SPEAS, and we've all been through it. Obviously, we know now it hasn't worked. I personally still think the rain and the waters that are coming have a lot to do with it, as well as the wind, because it's unstable. I am really happy to see number 2, where you say that you want them to include professional foresters. I think we're at that stage now, and I know that out in my world there's QEPs, and some of them are just somebody who's left his job and decided to become a consultant, and off he goes and he becomes sort of a QEP. But I think we're on Burke Mountain. I think we're in a spot where we need someone with some really good credentials to continue the work up there, because they have to look at what's happened all around it too, not just on the site. And that concerns me, that we're not getting the efficiencies and the professionalism that we should have. So I'm really happy to see this. And and on the development, after 5 years post-development, would that be going to the builders or the original developer of the lands?
We'd be requiring that that security be submitted as part of the watercourse protection development permit, so we'd be taking it right up front.
Okay, so I want to be very careful, because sometimes maybe some of the risk should be also shared by some of the builders. So however we put some covenant in that somebody is going to be responsible, whether it be a joint responsibility or not, or whether the developer assigns it to the builder and he takes full responsibility, don't know. But somebody, we better have a covenant when we do it. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you. Councillor O'Neill.
Yeah, thank you. That's an interesting process, and I've actually heard from, I'm not going to get into other municipalities, but never mind. Put that one aside. I'll go back to my other regular questions I have. 3 things. 1, it's something I hadn't thought of when I read the report, but in listening to Mr. Jarvie's comments, I'm wondering, one of the things that we're going to see coming out of this is the possibility that the SPEAS are going to be wider.
I don't know if necessarily the SPEA, because the methodology for the RAR is still going to be in place. The QEP is still going to determine what the appropriate watercourse protection setback would be, but there may be some tree buffers that would be associated with that as well. But
the tree buffer would be outside of the SPEAS?
Potentially, yes.
Oh, okay. I thought everything would be inside the SPEAS.
Well, currently, right now, there's the SPEA and there's the additional wind firm buffers. So it may...
Yeah.
First of all, it starts with the tree risk assessment. Based on that, then it could be a relatively, streamlined process forward, or there's going to require further review where we'll have to look at the removal, restoration, and stuff like that. But there could be some additional buffers associated for the tree protection.
Okay. And so the developer, when he puts up the guarantee 5 years, that's to look after the wind firm part or the SPEA part or both?
Any trees which are required to be protected.
Okay. If I were to phone up DFO or Ministry of Environment right now and say, what do you think of this plan? Are they going to have the same response that they had originally when they heard about it? You referred to the fact that they don't like tree removals in SPEA. Are they going to have concerns about this? Do you know yet, or is that asking to speculate? Or is this something you're already aware of and we're negotiating? Or
should council, give us the feedback today to move forward? That was a group that we would be looking to consult with, and there has been some changes to. I'm not sure the name of the act that regulates it, but there has been some changes on their end since the early RARs were reviewed through Coquitlam.
Mr. McIntyre.
Mr. Chair, if I could, good question. I was anticipating that. Chris and I were discussing that earlier today. And as Chris said, that if council supports us moving forward with this approach, we could talk with DFO and MOEs, not so much to consult, but just to make them aware. But the other thing I just want the committee to be aware of, and I found this very interesting, and when we met with the consultant and he was walking us through his findings and recommendations, he shared with us that clearly this isn't just a Coquitlam issue. This is happening all over the Lower Mainland, North Shore, up the valley, across the river in Surrey and whatnot. And these are all a variety of municipalities and different locales with different policies and bylaws dealing with this. They're all facing a lot of the same issues. And he actually commended us for, first he sympathized that Coquitlam was in this situation in the first place, but had taken steps to deal with it. But also we're prepared to look at it more on a policy level, on a bylaw basis. And he was commending us, and he said, he dare said there would be others that would be sort of interested in how we tackle this and the way we're going.
Yeah, and I'm supporting moving ahead with this. Science-based, it's very reasonable, and public safety is paramount here, so that's very important. So, but I'm going to be very interested in seeing how everybody responds to all this. The development community means a lot of extra land that has to be set aside. It'll be interesting to see what the costs involved are with that as well. Now, I guess I've got to rip a Band-Aid off of something that's just beginning to heal here. Page 4, next steps. You mentioned Mr. Jarvis as well. Based on committee's feedback, staff will prepare OCP amendments to make sure that this gets followed through and everything is going to be in the OCP there. Just like it was all in the OCP, the neighborhood plan for the walls and what. So, as we talked about a few weeks ago, so I was told then that just because something is in the OCP, it doesn't mean that it actually happens, that there has to be some sort of some other regulations or bylaw or something. It was a bit of there's some policy gap that existed, even though the OCP at the time said build with the slope up there, and if you followed the OCP, there wouldn't be any big walls up there. So OCP amendments, is that all we need to do here?
Mr. Jarvis?
Well, where the watercourse protection is different than the retaining walls is that we've actually established development permit areas to protect watercourses. And through that, those development permits, we review them against certain guidelines. Right now, these guidelines aren't embedded in the OCP because we haven't adopted them. However, if we are to adopt them, these are going to be the criteria under which these development permits are reviewed.
Okay.
So it's more firm that way.
When firm will be firm. Good. Okay. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Councillor Wilson.
Thank you very much for this. This is awesome, and I'm so glad that it's so thorough. I'm so glad you're with the recommendations that you're proposing, and it's cool to see this. We're kind of leading the way in the Lower Mainland on this. I had similar thoughts to Councillor O'Neill in terms of the size of the wind buffer. But at the same time, I believe that it's a lot more important to be safe than efficient with the land. And I do realize that, yes, in some cases it may lead to lower lot yields and it may increase the cost of some of these lots. But I think it's an important decision to make sure that it's done properly, environmentally friendly, and safely. So I really appreciate that. I really like the 5-year responsibility put on the builders in the area, and really want to congratulate you for the great work on this.
Thank you.
I have myself on the list here. Going back a number of years, this matter, I think it's been raised myself and different people about the wind firmness of some of these trees and these retention of these trees. And our biggest difficulty over the years was with DFO and not allowing anything to happen within that area. I know Craig heard the comments over the years, the same thing about this. So it took some bad things to happen to get people to wake up about this issue in there. What I like about this report going forward is it's been actually quite well received, but going forward, when we're doing these subdivisions now, we're going in there, we're going to be doing this work on these things before people in houses are in there. So this can be done. So a lot of people now have moved in, saw all these forest areas, and there's upset that the trees they saw. So when this is done, it'll be done in and it'll be planted earlier. We're going to have the right type of species in there. And I don't believe there's going to be any net loss. The beauty about the RIR system is we have a QEP, which goes through MOE, DFO, and they set the parameters of the setback on that. Wind firm trees can also just simply be almost like if you're requiring the planting of trees in the backyard, you may take credit for those or back and forth. Not necessarily is it going to cause any yield loss on a development. It depends on what the QEP report comes back and what it sets at the setback is. So I think we've been doing a lot of wind firming already on developments. I don't think there's been much loss or net yield in that. I also want to make sure that people realize this is citywide. This isn't just Burke Mountain. This is going to apply citywide, and we have a lot of development that's going to change some of the areas we have. So we're going to look at stanza trees throughout the area and make sure they're properly assessed for wind firm, where they're not going to be hazardous trees. So I want to point that part out. And the other thing I want to just hopefully, when we talk about the 5 years, which I think is a good thing, we're going to take a fee from the developers. We're going to do the maintenance of it, right? Or are we going to say to the developer, no, you get your own people in there? How is that going to, is that strictly going to be us taking a fee? Our lands, our forest department's going to do or contract out the work to maintain it?
Well, first step was getting through today, and should we get the direction today, we'll work on what exactly that program is going to look like. But we don't typically take on the responsibility. We would be looking at developer contracting that out. I guess one thing is, how do we monitor compliance on that? I think there's issues around that right now with some of the issues going on right now. So it sometimes may be better if they pay a fee for that whole 5 years into the city. The city then hires a contractor, has a better control over the monitoring and making sure that that happens. Secondly, the issue comes out once you develop properties and you have houses backing onto SPEAS and you have the wind farm, how do you gain access? How do people know for 5 years that there are people that are coming in there that will have to have access to their properties to look after these trees, look after these SPEAS? So that's another issue that we want to make sure we cover off, that we don't get, well, yeah, you may want to go in and look at it. It's my property. You can't come across it or whatever. So how do we deal with those access issues? Because I do know with Black Walnut Associates, you can't get into some of the areas off the roads and everything because of the topography and everything. You have to get in through yards. So that's going to be an issue that's going to have to be dealt with within the sales agreement, a covenant on, or something's have to be made aware that
X number of times a year, the city's going to be coming in, either by a contractor or the developer, however we set it up, to look after these trees in this area for that period of time. Okay? So those are my comments. I have no other speakers, so to have a mover and a seconder on this?
You do.
Okay. All in favor? Opposed? Carried. Thank you.
Item 6 pertains to the Parks, Recreation, Culture Program Services Delivery and Tracking. Reports before you for information.
Taken over the seat.
Second.
Moved by Mayor Stewart, seconded by Councillor Zerillo. Did you want to make a presentation?
No, thank you, Mr. Chair. No, I did not intend to. If there's any questions, just an information report on some of the initiatives we're undertaking. If you have any questions, just happy to answer.
Thank you. Are there any questions? There are no questions. All in favor of receipt? Opposed? Carried unanimously.
Thank you.
You're good.
Terry that did it all.
Mr. Clerk.
Yeah, it's the chair.
Oh, great, Chair. The next item is another business item. OB1 concerns electric vehicle charging capacity in multifamily buildings. It was raised by Councillor Wilson.
Thanks. I just wanted to bring this up as an item for council because there was some discussion about it in a series of emails from some of our residents, and just wanted to ask for council to give direction to staff to start looking at policy for electric charging stations, especially in multifamily buildings. And I'm referring mainly to new multifamily buildings, not so much retrofitting older ones. That's a separate issue. But I sent a link out to a report on some experts in terms of what they think the adoption rate for electric vehicles will be, and sometime in the next 5 to 10 years, the cost to purchase and operate an electric vehicle will be very similar to a regular internal combustion engine vehicle. And at that point, there'll also be longer range for batteries. There'll be a lot more public charging facilities. And so a consumer will have probably be a lot more inclined to purchase an electric vehicle because same price, and we have all this infrastructure in place. The one thing they don't have in place is a place to charge it if they live in a multifamily building. And so the state of California has policies on it. The city of Vancouver has policies on it. Lots of other jurisdictions do. We don't yet. And I wanted us to look at starting some policy because, if you look at how long it takes for a multifamily building to be constructed, it could take up to 2 years for the building permit. It could take a couple of years to build it. It could take us a year or so to create policy. That's 5-6 years. At that point, we might be at the point where the adoption of electric vehicles is huge. And we're just at that point bringing in some policy for charging stations. So I don't have suggestions or answers. I just want us to look at what some other jurisdictions are doing, look at what we have the ability to do, and start figuring out what we will ask the development community to do. Most developers aren't too interested in putting a lot of capacity in because it's the general public has not really caught on to electric vehicles yet because the cost is so high. But within 5 years or so, that could all change. And it could take 5 years for us to bring a policy for a building permit to be issued and for the building to be created. And at that point, it's too late. So it would be great to get ahead of the curve. It's similar to flat screen TVs. It's similar to smartphones. The adoption rate on all of those was much faster than most people thought they would be. And I'd like staff's or council's support in providing guidance to staff to start working on this policy.
Do you have some other people who wish to speak also? Mayor Stewart?
Yeah, I agree completely. I think this is evolving very quickly, and as some of you may know, I'm actually shopping right now for an electric vehicle. I'm one that doesn't believe that the city's role is to put electric charging stations all around the city in order to fill people's electric gas cans, if you will. That's our role as sewer, water. We have specific roles, but our role in this capacity is to make sure the housing meets needs in the future. Developers typically can't sell components where they have to say to the buyer, trust me, someday you're going to be thankful you have this thing that we've charged you for. So we, I think, have to be a little bit, we have to press the market a little bit to make sure that they understand that we want these buildings to not have to be retrofitted 5 years from now for something that is foreseeable. It's absolutely foreseeable that right now we need 110 and 220 capacity in underground parking lots. And single-family homes, I'm one of those. There's probably a panel in the garage. It's probably easy enough to wire it yourself. I'm not willing to step in yet there, but I know multifamily, absolutely.
Okay. Councillor Reid.
Some of the older buildings are already doing it. There's lots of excitement out there about this, and I know it came to our strata, and they were talking about where they could take some visitor parking and make 2 or 3 stalls there, and people plug in, and strata makes the money off it. I think if someone was given a price of $600 to $1,000 to whatever retrofit or whatever plugs it is you need in our building downstairs, and we just lose 2 visitor parking spots, but it would be there for people to come in, and you get a little card or whatever you do now, and you just tab in, and Strata makes the money back. So they put the money out and they get the money back. So don't think that people aren't out there doing it now, because they are, lots of them. And I fully back this, but I think one thing that would be helpful is I think it should be mandatory in new buildings, but I would sure like the city to do a bit of research, and I'd like to know what options there are available out there for retrofitting older buildings with underground parking. So, thank you.
Thank you. I have myself down here. I have myself down here next. This is a good item to be brought forward. I think how fast the uptake of electric vehicles is it may be fast, maybe slower, but I think Chris has brought out a good point. We have to get ahead of this. I think it's something the community added or looked at for 2018 when we talk about your business plan, looking at things and how we fit that in. It's also something that, I think if it expands, when you talk about 2 stations, let's say in a high-rise of 100 or 150 units, won't be enough. So how do you, I think it's a very involved question. How do we supply every parking stall one? How is it done? I think, the actual, you could have a system where you have everyone gets a card, you have a charging area, you pay by that. But there's a lot of information that has to be looked at to make this work. So I think it's a very proper thing that we should be looking at. It's going to take longer. I think, there's probably 4 million vehicles in BC or more gas and diesel powered. To change that over is going to take a long time for people to have the money to do this. So it's not going to happen overnight, but it is going to slowly change over. I hope governments have the foresight to look forward and plan for and build infrastructure and things to provide more electricity down the road rather than waiting until the day that don't have that power. So we need to plan ahead. And even if it's not needed now, we need to make sure that we're planning ahead, because if it does happen, we're going to need that. So, Councillor O'Neill.
All sorts of letters of the alphabet. The first 4 letters of the alphabet are ACDC, electric. A priority, B priority, C priority for the business, and we're going to have to decide. I'm with Councillor Asmussen there on. It's not something I'm prepared to tell staff to go and work on right now. Not with everything that staff has going on in its workday. We just can't keep piling on extra stuff. So we should have a discussion when we're developing the 2018 work plan about whether or not this goes on and what priority it is, A, B, or C. So ACDC, A, B, or C, and Site C. Yes, okay, that's the third one. Yeah. I think that's what Councillor Asmussen was talking about as well. Electricity. In response to, for elaboration on something Councillor Reid was talking about retrofitting the old buildings and things like that, the UBCM is bringing forward a couple of resolutions the Metro Vancouver is bringing forward a couple of resolutions to the UBCM convention in September, asking the provincial government to change the BC Strata Property Act and the BC Utilities Commission Act to make it easier for strata councils to get all the regulations in place, all the permits in place to do some retrofitting to allow for plug-ins to charge their cars.
We're just ahead of the game over there.
There you are. So they're looking after that. And so I look forward to a discussion about business plan priorities and business plan additions, but I'm not ready to support this now.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Towner.
Thank you. I think this is a really good discussion. I agree with Councillor Wilson that the trend is coming, and there is such a lag. I think it's something worth looking at down the road, and at least getting the wiring in place or roughed in or something in the newer high-rises. So I fully support it. Okay. I think it's a good idea. It's being proactive rather than reactive.
Councillor Hodge.
When do we do the priority setting exercise? That's in the fall. Is that October?
It is. It's near the end of the year, sometimes the beginning of the year. As part of the budget process, we normally do a report. I will have some comments about this whole process after everybody's spoken.
Okay. I think I agree. I understand where Councillor O'Neill is coming from in that, it's back to the, great ideas, everything is a priority. How do we prioritize the priorities? On this one, I think that we do need to look at it. When we look at the number of projects coming forward, which is what's keeping your department busy, to not be out in front of this, I think we have an opportunity right now. Just following the SkyTrain, we know we've got a lot of development coming. We know there's projects that are going to come forward in the next little while, and I think we owe it to those developers to get out in front and say, this is something we're considering. So that's not one of those, we just changed this and now this is something that's new. And I don't want to get to a situation where we have to grandfather a whole lot of buildings in. I think we get out of there now and get this in on their radar, because I agree that I think electric cars are coming. I didn't know that Worship was looking at a car. I'm looking at an electric car as well. Now, I'm not in a multifamily, but I'm to the point now. I'm starting to look at that, and I'm sure that many others are. And it would be nice that they could move into a building. And I think this may become a selling point for that building that that they have it already in place. So I think we have to move on this fairly quickly. 2 months may not make a big difference in the overall scheme of things, but I think we need to get out in front of this.
Well, once again, I think as Mr. O'Neill pointed out, and we just saw the presentation about the processing time. There's a lot of work going on in there. To add to it, it's going to be difficult. Mr. Stebbins.
When this item was added to the agenda, we had a discussion at E-Team, and I just wanted to provide some general comments. Normally, I am very supportive of being very measured in terms of putting priorities to things A, B, and C and not acting until you have a proper review. Jim does have a proper review of this on his work program, but as you know, these reviews often take a significant amount of time, and the consensus of staff is that this societal shift to greater use of electric vehicles is happening and will happen. And especially here in BC, where we do have more access to hydropower than some other jurisdictions, so we should be encouraging and leading in that regard. We believe there is enough evidence out there that we should be, without extensive reviews, encouraging the development community to do this as part of all the high-rise, especially the new high-rises that are coming, and there is a high-rise boom coming. So if council is comfortable with that, I've asked the planning department to consider in the interim period while they're doing the review, which they are going to be doing, to immediately start encouraging developers of the multiple family sites to target 20% of their parking stalls to install charging stations. That was the discussion we had at E-Team, but I don't want to do that unless there is a general comfort on council to do that.
I think it's just once May.
Well, I think it's a good idea, but remember how we got the bike racks, you guys? Remember how we've got lots of stuff through the years? We've told Jim what we want to see, and he says to the developer, when you get to council, they're going to be asking if you're doing ta-ta. And most of the developers are in it now, they know it, so they're going to put some in. I don't know if they'll put 20% in, but they'll certainly
It would just be an encouraging thing.
That's what I mean, just, oh, gee, do you happen to have one? You don't, oh, it's not good. Yeah.
No, and I think around the table, I would presume that probably people are, most council, I don't think that any.
Would anybody object to us doing that?
No.
I don't think so, no. I think council is probably very happy with that. Okay, thank you. That's
Can I just add one thing to it, though? That's the person who brought it forward. 20% is awesome, but encouraging the future capacity. So whether it's conduits, whether it's roughing in wires or whatever, but at some point it might be 70% of those cars in that arcade needed. Getting that service into the building, right? So there's huge issues that I didn't get into, but
and we will do an extensive review. And so what we can do is encourage the 20% of the plugs to the thing and to provide the capacity
to expand.
To expand.
Okay. Mr. McIntyre.
Yes, thanks, Mr. Chair. Pete's got it. I just would want council to be aware that it's also something that engineering is looking through their community energy management program, and so there has been discussion with Joseph around that as well. So I still think it would call for a broader review or a more detailed review, and that would be then considered as part of the business plan. But meanwhile, we can get on with it based on the direction we've received today. So that's very good.
Okay.
Thank you. Adjournment.
Second.
All in favor? Opposed, carried. What about 10 minutes? Okay.